Good afternoon, and thank you for participating in Adelaide Capital's first virtual conference, COVID-19 in Healthcare. We're glad you are here, and we hope you stay throughout the afternoon to hear all the exciting things that Canadian-listed small-cap companies are doing to help fight this global pandemic. COVID-19 is taking lives, changing the way we live, the way we do business, and the way we connect with each other and the community. We've all evolved greatly over the past few months, sacrificing a lot of freedoms for the sake of each other and each other's well-being. The companies who will present today have demonstrated incredible innovation and speed under tremendous pressure to develop new products to help combat this disease and save lives. These companies are not only compelling investment opportunities, they're led by and employ modern-day heroes, and we are honored that they have agreed to take some time away from their busy schedules to tell us about their technologies and products. We've broken up the afternoon into thematic sessions. The first session covers antiviral technologies and treating secondary symptoms like heart and respiratory complications caused by the virus. Our first panel will follow with opportunities arising from COVID-19 and navigating the supply chain. The next session shines a light on testing and treatment, which leads to our second panel, Into the Lab, exploring testing and treatment for COVID-19 and other pathogens. We'll take a quick break around market close and resume at 4:15 with a few words by Jordan Harding of the Hand Sand Project. The Hand Sand Project provides free hand sanitizer to the most vulnerable or exposed members of the community in Ottawa. They have ambitions to expand to other cities and seek partners to help them take this regional initiative national or even global. We hope that if you enjoy these sessions and find them informative, you'll consider a donation to or get involved with the Hand Sand Project. The day ends with keynote speaker Rahim of Adelaide Capital and his address, Signal from the Noise, A Compass to Finding COVID-19 Investment Opportunities. Before we get started, I would like to introduce one of our sponsors, Market One Media. I mentioned earlier that this pandemic has changed the way we do business significantly and will continue to long after we are done with social distancing. At Adelaide Capital, we have embraced this change with positivity and a sense of community. We truly believe this virtual world is here to stay, and companies need to adapt their investor relations programs to stay relevant and access existing and new shareholders. Here to tell you more about what companies can do to take advantage of this shift is Veronica Van Mullen and Stephen Mills of Market One Media. Thank you both for joining us today. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about Market One Media and the public company strategies you offer?
Thanks, Deb and Tina. We're really happy to be here. Hi, everyone. My name is Veronica Van Mullen, and I'm joined with my partner, Stephen Mills, and we're with Market One. So Market One, our goal and our objective for public companies is to gain more retail investor exposure to your story and to your company. As I'm sure you all know, investors, as Deborah mentioned, are just glued to their screens right now. And they're significantly missing the opportunity to attract these retail investors unless they're tapping into these digital-first marketing techniques. So what we do at Market One is we leverage similar techniques that trillion-dollar companies like Amazon, Facebook, and Google are using to attract consumers. We're using those same techniques to attract investors to your story and to cut through the noise. And we're doing this through video, editorial, as well as social media techniques. Recently, we partnered with the Toronto Stock Exchange as well as the CSC, and I'll let Steve speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thanks, Veronica. So, yeah, we've been partnered with the TSX and the TSX Venture for the last 3 years for their Venture 50 program, which highlights all the fastest growing companies on the Venture Exchange. I was with the TSX for many years working with public companies, and what attracted me to Market One was not only the content creation of the videos and the editorials, but the ability to get that coverage online and on BNN and through the different sites and so forth. So we had a really good opportunity to work with a lot of healthcare companies and companies in the space. Nova Heart was one where really interesting business where they, with a drop of blood, they create they grow an artificial heart in the lab, to Theralase technologies that are looking to fight cancer treatment. So looking forward to a lot of the updated stories here today. It's been great working with Trevor Cardinal in the past and Kim and Pillai in the past. So look forward to hearing those updated stories. There's another really good example, I think, of a healthcare company, Veronica, you were working with as well.
Yeah, we do have the pleasure of currently working with Pillai, who's presenting here today. And Therapeutics, I'm sure several of you know that story. They're Bloomberg backed. They've been a Venture 50 for the last 2 years, and they came to us looking for help to reach more retail investors online. They didn't have an online presence, and over the course of 6 months, we grew their online following by over 4,000 retail investors online following their stories. And that directly led to 2,000% increase in the visibility of their press releases, as well as a loyal shareholder base that's grown and now actively following their story as they enter the final stages of the recent results. So these are just some of the ways that we can help healthcare-related companies. And I'll let Steve kind of wrap it up here for us.
Yeah, so I would just say if there's any public companies that have thought about being a little bit strategic with targeting healthcare investors online or through social media, or even just from a liquidity standpoint, looking to help with liquidity and trading, feel free to reach out to Veronica or myself, and more details can be reached on at market1.ca.
A few quick housekeeping items I wanted to mention. First, I would like to make everyone aware that the presentations made during this conference will contain forward-looking statements. If you are unfamiliar with forward-looking statements, I encourage you to read the disclosure contained in each company's corporate presentation. Those presentations can be found on the company websites. And then secondly, questions can be typed in the Q&A at the bottom of the box of your screen throughout the conference, and will be answered at the end of each company's presentation. Whatever questions are not addressed within the 20-minute segment will be addressed in the panel session if time permits. You can also email your questions to info@adcap.ca. Now that those few items are out of the way, it's time to get started with our first presentation. And there's actually a fantastic tie-in to our charity partner, as this particular company has a product that's focused on helping protect people, and in particular healthcare workers and immunocompromised people against COVID-19 and other viruses. I'm pleased to introduce Innovation Science, a company that develops topical and transdermal consumer products, including DermSafe, a non-alcoholic hand sanitizer, which has been proven to kill bacteria and viruses. Here to tell us more about that exciting product and the record quarter the company is in the midst of is CEO Terry Hallett. Terry, thank you for participating in our virtual conference.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Appreciate it.
So I'll let you take it away.
All right. Well, Ovation Science is our company, and we're a public company traded on the CSE, and you can see the stock symbol there. DermSafe is our key product right now, and we're very much helping fight the battle against COVID-19. You hate to think, in a sense, that there's an opportunity when there's such a pandemic going on. But in our case, we look at it as we need to do something about what is happening and going forward on the pandemic. We're a topical and transdermal product development company. We have a patented technology for delivery of drugs, both topically to the skin and through the skin. And it's called Invisicare. We were backed by over 20 years of research and development on this technology. Now, Ovation sells and licenses this highly effective health and wellness products, both in North America and globally. DermSafe is a unique hand sanitizer product without alcohol that assists in the battle against the COVID-19 virus, the invisible glove. Investment highlights we're going to talk about today are the global markets, which are many diverse revenue streams, the products itself, the science, and the team behind it. As I mentioned earlier, we are a public company, went public in November of 2018 on the CSE. We trade under the symbol OVAT. We have 23 million shares out, tightly held. A third of the shares are held by management. We're well capitalized. Our business model is to generate both online and wholesale revenue from the sale of our own product lines, including DermSafe, which is the product that we're capitalizing and talking about mostly today. Our out-licensing business model generates revenue from multiple sources, including both product development fees, licensing fees, ongoing royalties, and sales of the polymer itself in VisiCare to our licensees. Our directors and executives of the company and advisors are well experienced in the industries that we're in. Lots of pharmaceutical background here and lots of background here in the public market. Our board of directors are listed. Our key scientist is Dr. James Rosell. He is the developer of not only in VisiCare technology, but he's also the developer of the DermSafe product that we will be talking more about. We have a medical advisory board. It's international medical doctors in dermatology throughout North America, headed up by the Dr. Charles Lynn, Department of Medicine at the University of Toronto Hospital. Why is Ovation different? This is the thing. As I mentioned earlier, we have a patented technology that has the delivery capability to take a product and hold it on the skin, the ingredient on the skin, both topically and transdermally. And the key also is that it's patented. It's 11 countries, the patents of Canada, USA, Australia, Europe, and Asia. We cannot be duplicated. Now, the unique COVID opportunity from our point of view is that we have the hand sanitizer already, and we just launched it in February of 2000, well, just 2 months ago. We're expanding globally. The active ingredient used in DermSafe is chlorhexidine glutenate, also abbreviated as CHG, and it's proven effective at killing both envelope viruses, of which COVID-19 is, as well as bacteria. Powered by the VisiCare polymers, which, as I mentioned earlier, cannot be duplicated. We have multiple business model of income. We have wholesale online sales from products. We have revenue generated from development, product fees, I should say, licensing fees, royalties based on the sale of the products, as well as the VisiCare polymer themselves. Our technology, it's unique. And what is the combination of VisiCare and what it's really all about? It's a combination of what we call hydrophobic, do not like water, hydrophilic, like water, and we're able to, because of the polymer technology that was developed by Dr. Rosell, in combination of, we're able to hold products on the skin, which would typically wash off. And that's the key in everything we're doing here. Our products do not wash off, so they stay on the skin to do the job they're intended to do. We have global patents, we mentioned, in over 11 countries. Our science, just a couple of studies I'm going to mention here. The first one we did was when you have the DermSafe, particularly on your product, how do you know you have it on the product later on? That question comes a lot from people. So we did a study at California Skin Research Institute, and they had 30 subjects, 30 individuals apply the product on their forearms and let it dry. And then what they did was they scrubbed those individuals for 2 minutes with 5% ammonium hydroxide. Don't do this at home. It's a very, very toxic chemical, but we wanted to simulate multiple hand washers. And so they did this at 10 minutes, 2 hours, and 4 hours. And the study you can see on the side there, it shows that from the stratum corneum, you can see that after 10 minutes, the DermSafe firmly bound to the stratum corneum. There it is in VisiCare, bound there, it's on there. And then at 4 hours, we saw it starting to feather off of DermSafe. So that's why we say reapply every 4 hours. Now, again, I go back and say that's with a very vigorous hand wash. The second study we wanted to know was if you wash your hands, and which we should, particularly in this particular environment we're in right now with the pandemic, but also in using alcohol sanitizers, our hands tend to dry out. So we wanted to say, what happens when you have our product on? Well, Biossance Labs, another FDA-approved facility, did a subject with 20 individuals. Half of the group, 10 of them applied our product on their hands, and the other half had no protection whatsoever. Now, they came into the lab 5 days in a row. They washed their hands 10 times a day with a hospital-grade soap. They washed for 30 seconds, this wash and rinse. And what is unique and what is interesting here at the end, it shows here the red line is the people who did not have any protection. They did not have DermSafe on. And of that, 4 of the people had to quit the study before the time frame was up because of dermatitis set in. In other words, their hands just dried right out and were in terrible shape. 6 of them completed the study, but as you can see, the ones who completed it, their skin, the red line, takes you all the way down to minus, a big minus there, and they had dermatitis, and so no protection. The ones who had our product on, had DermSafe on, not only did they all finish the study, but look, the moisture content in their skin went up. And that's the key here. So we say that even though you have our DermSafe product on and you should use it and last for 4 hours, continue to wash your hands as you would normally. Particularly if you're in a healthcare setting or you're in an environment in the restaurant industry where you wash your hands lots. Isn't it nice to know that you not only have protection against the bacteria or the viruses, but you also have skin protection as well. There's our DermSafe hand sanitizer. As I mentioned here, backed by science. It talks about some of the science. We've done studies both in the US and in Europe against a host of bacteria, including MRSA, real issue in hospitals, E. coli, C. difficile, plus other viruses, including H1N1. We all remember the swine flu of about 10 years ago, the bird flu, H5N1, and of course, influenza, H3N2, the flu that we seem to be getting every year, which last year in the United States, over 55,000 people died from. These are all we call envelope viruses. The COVID-19 also is an envelope virus. There's no surrogate to test, so no tests have been done on, particularly on COVID-19 at this time. But I can tell you that the H1N1 swine flu, according to our experts, is the closest one to COVID-19. It's an added level of defense. It forms an invisible polymer glove on your hands. It's not made with alcohol, which we mentioned earlier in our studies, therefore it doesn't dry out the hands. It provides protection used in CHD. Now, chlorhexidine glutenate is an ingredient that's been used in hospitals in soaps, and you've heard of HibaCleanse. I think you can buy it in many drugstores as well. It's been used in hospitals for over 60 years because it kills both gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria as well as viruses. It also has an affinity to bind to the skin and hold onto the skin for long periods of time. DermSafe has been approved by Health Canada under disinfectants and hand sanitizers, COVID-19 interim measure. It has 2 identification numbers, DIN numbers in Canada, 1 for personal use and 1 for commercial use. The market opportunity is global for our product and is starting to show that. International sales, we've shipped to China, we've shipped to the United Kingdom, we're shipping well within Canada, with additional orders continue to be received. Just yesterday, we announced a license agreement with Israel with one of the largest medical supply companies, targeting all of the hospitals and all of the clinics in Israel. Ovation is working with other companies and discussions for licensing rights and product sales in Asia, Europe, and Latin America. Today, we have over $1.5 million in inventory ready to ship, and we have all the components bought and purchased for another 1 million units. And we manufacture right now both in the United States and very shortly in Canada as well. Orders from Canada, we're shipping minimum 5,000 unit orders. We're only doing right now wholesale sales, but those distributors will be selling retail, and we're looking forward to opening that up as well. DermSafe, demand is long-term. The reality is the vaccine is not imminent. The Southern Hemisphere, and that's the interest we have from South America, et cetera, is just going into the flu season. The fall and flu season will be quickly come here to North America. The flu, as we know, we mentioned earlier, kills 55,000 people just in the US every year. It's here every year. So demand for DermSafe will be long-term as people return to work and back to normal life. Employers will want to protect their employees and their customers. And I bring that up because as we go back to work as an employer, how do you get your people to come back, and how are they going to feel safe to come back to work? What are you going to do for them if you're the employer? Wouldn't it be nice if you had DermSafe as the product sitting there on the counter, and when they came in, everybody would apply it, and then everybody would have their lunch break, and then after that, they wash their hands and they reapply it again. It would be nice to know from the employee's point of view that the employer thought enough about them to have this product in there, but also from the point of view of one employee to another, knowing that Bill in the back or Mary over in the corner, everybody was using this product to protect not only themselves, but also their other fellow co-workers. It did not take this home. That's very much important for people to know that. DermSafe, the summary, the demand for DermSafe will grow, as we mentioned earlier. It's been approved by Health Canada. Our market opportunity continues to grow. The pandemic, the fear will continue. Somebody mentioned the other day about how do we open up sports facilities. I mentioned our product, DermSafe, has been supplied to the Canadian Olympic teams in the last two Olympics. It started with the one in Rio, where the dirty water conditions, and when we reached out to them, because the rowers reached out to us, automatically said please, and the product was supplied to them. And then the same in Korea. As a matter of fact, we were ready to ship DermSafe to Quebec to get ready to ship to Japan on the Monday, when on Sunday they announced, Canadians, that they pulled out. And of course, after that, everybody pulled out, and a good thing they did, and stopped it. But so people are using it and people are wanting it because of the protection of who they are and where they're going. Can you imagine if you went to and I don't know when sports will open up, but a hockey game, and you're sitting next to people you don't know who they are or whatever, or what situation they're under. But when you went in there, if the NHL or the hockey team, the local team, gave you a little sachet of our product and said, here, we're happy you're back. We're happy we're back, but we're happier that you're back as well. Here, you'll be protected for the next 4 hours while you watch the game. It's the kind of protection people will be looking for as they go back to work. Yesterday, the CDC chief, or 2 days ago, I guess it was, said there could be a second and possibly worse coronavirus outbreak this winter. And the WHO came up with a statement to follow that up as well this morning. Ovation is prepared. We're financed. We're dedicated to build DermSafe into a global brand and to help the fight against COVID-19 and to keep people safe. Thank you. Be safe. Stay safe.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to be in this, I think, very timely conference. And thank you, Adelaide Capital, for inviting us to be part of it. My name is Hilton Karen. I'm the President and CEO of iFabric Corp. iFabric Corp has a history going back to 1985, when the company originally focused on being specialty products for the women's fashion industry. In 1998, we developed our first patented adhesive bra, which we still manufacture to this day. The division has grown to be a segment leader, and we continue to expand our offerings, many of which we have filed successful patents for. In 2008, we started a new division, which is Intelligent Fabrics North America. With our apparel manufacturing history, we felt there was a need to modernize and move the needle in all areas of apparel. Infused and coded technologies were gaining momentum, and besides the fashion industry, we saw an even greater application in the medical and healthcare markets. Protex 2 is our class-leading antimicrobial technology. It's been exhaustively tested for efficacy against some of the most viral HAIs, or hospital-acquired infections, and also tested for durability to washing against some of our top competitors. Our key customers have done exhaustive independent third-party testing, and we're proud to say that Protex 2 has repeatedly come out #1, and by far. I'm pleased to advise that Protex 2 is currently submitted to the US EPA, and we anticipate being the world's first textile technology with a kill claim. When we originally approached EPA for a kill claim, they actually had no protocol and invited us to write the protocol for them. And I'm very pleased to say that we wrote the protocol, and we really have pioneered a segment that they really had no prior experience with, which is, I'm very proud of our team for achieving that. In 2012, we started working with Holland America Cruise Lines. due to the outbreak on many ships with the norovirus. We did extensive testing of our Protex 2 AV, our antiviral formulation against the norovirus and the H1N1 virus at the time, with excellent results. Unfortunately, they felt they had the infection problem under control and they didn't need our product. It would have cost approximately $5 to $10 a passenger to treat linens, towels, napkins, tablecloths, all the contact, or majority of contact points that harbor pathogens. And unfortunately, we know how that worked out for the cruise industry. I think they'll be back. Turning to COVID-19, the current pandemic has made us really go back and look at our antiviral efforts. We're having two very important tests overseen by epidemiologists as we speak. One is against the actual COVID-19 pathogen, and the other is against the human coronavirus. We believe that positive tests will support emergency applications for claims that will allow us imminent introduction in many markets, from PPEs, the gowns, the gloves, the masks that everybody's become familiar with, to a host of other markets, from scrubs, sportswear, to everyday clothing. Other markets include the military, transportation, the hospitality industries, to name a few others. The opportunities are truly immense. We've developed strategic commercial partnerships with all the companies you see on this page: Under Armour, the North Face, Lululemon, Walmart, Target, SBI, to name a few of our bigger customers. The development of the antiviral technology and resuscitating our tests have heightened their interest to include in many future offers that they've started developing with us. 2017, 2018, we made a strategic move in the company to cut out many areas of business that were not part of our long-term goal. We eliminated sleepwear and focused the lingerie business back to our core specialty bras and accessory products, all while adding new products. And as I said earlier, many of these products have successfully been patented, and we're rather proud of developing these products. Page 15, please. While the audience looks over this page, I just want to say that 2018 and 2019 was the start of the real growth of the Intelligent Fabric division, with sales of finished performance apparel to major retailers. We control all aspects of the finished product, from design right through manufacturing, which always includes our technology in the products. The programs have allowed the retailers to increase sales, and the programs have all been renewed. In addition to that, due to the quality and excellent delivery, many additional programs have been confirmed, and we'll see the benefits of these programs towards the end of this year and going into the future. We see significant growth there. And in closing, due to the pandemic, we anticipate demand in many new areas. We've commenced designing and sourcing new products in anticipation of the positive results that of the tests that I've already mentioned. And our supply chain is well poised to handle significant growth.
So next up, we have Therapeutics. We think what they're doing in the fight against COVID is incredibly important. Please note that there is a slight change in the schedule, and Cardio will participate in the second panel, Testing and Treatment, at 3:40. And without further delay, we're very pleased to welcome David Elsley, President and CEO of Therapeutics. Cardio is developing a therapeutic strategy to protect against inflammatory heart failure. Recent data suggests that a pre-existing heart condition is a significant complicating factor contributing to higher mortality rates in patients with COVID-19. And such therapies and treatments are essential in the fight against the virus. David, thank you very much for joining us today. Please tell the audience more about Cardiol and the therapies you're developing.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's certainly a pleasure to be here today and participate with a number of distinguished presenting companies today. It's also a great privilege to have an opportunity to discuss the work we're doing at Cardiol as it potentially relates in a very significant way to the challenge we're all facing together, which is this global pandemic associated with COVID-19. I'll just start with a bit of the genesis of Cardiol and where it all began. We have been operating in the area of heart failure medicine for over 30 years. The Cardiol team has been developing important medicines for cardiovascular disease and heart disease for the past 3 decades. And what attracted us to a new innovation and a new approach to the treatment of this deadly disease was a publication that appeared back in 2010 in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, which is a globally renowned Tier 1 high-impact journal read internationally by cardiologists and widely respected. And this basically demonstrated the ability of cannabidiol, or now well known as CBD, to protect the cardiovascular system. So it's basically a cardioprotective molecule. And this was discovered and developed in a model of diabetes and hypertension, which are 2 of the major factors that drive the leading cause of death and disability in the Western world today, which is heart failure. So this is where the heart fails to pump sufficient blood to oxygenate tissues. So how is this relevant? We obviously did not know this back then, but not a day goes by where we don't read a new media publication about the impact of the most vulnerable, basically the impact of this deadly virus on patients that have a background in cardiovascular risk. So we know that this disease obviously is a cardiopulmonary resuscitatory or respiratory disorder. But what is now becoming increasingly recognized is one of the targets of the attack of this virus is the heart. And when you have elevated risks or a background in cardiovascular disease or high blood pressure or diabetes, you are at significantly higher risk for poor outcomes with this disease and much higher mortality. And this is illustrated by this publication that was just published in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, in late March. And what you see on the right side, this is a Kaplan-Meier survival curve. So as those lines trend down, mortality is rising or survival is decreasing. And you can see without a prior cardiovascular injury or cardiovascular risk, you have very significant survival, well over 95%. However, in the presence of a prior myocardial injury or cardiac injury, could be a prior heart attack, could be long-term high blood pressure, diabetes, other factors that influence heart disease, you have a very significant mortality rate in the range of 50%. So a background in cardiovascular risk significantly elevates the risk to patients that develop or get COVID-19. And this is also shown on this slide, quite compelling here, with respect to elevated blood markers. So when a COVID-19 patient is diagnosed and they present in the ER, we now know that they're taking blood markers for elevated risk. One of them is troponin levels, which is a marker spilled over into the blood, which is an indicator of cardiovascular risk or trouble with the cardiovascular system. And you can see the bottom, so here we have the y-axis is mortality. So as these lines go up, mortality risk rises. And I'll just compare the lower and the higher one. We basically have, without cardiovascular disease and normal troponin levels, this marker of elevated risk, we have very low mortality rates in about 7% of patients. However, when you go to the upper right, and you look at a background in cardiovascular disease plus elevated troponin levels, you have a mortality rate approaching 75%, which is very striking. With this background of cardiovascular risk, you have very significant elevation in mortality risk. So why is that important to Cardiol? It's important to Cardiol because we're developing essentially a cardioprotective agent. This has always been our focus. Our mandate, our mission has always been to overcome the challenges of the leading cause of death and disability in the Western world, which is heart failure, or a failure of the cardiovascular system, which puts high pressure on the heart and causes the heart to basically fail. What we know in terms of this important molecule that we're developing pharmaceutically pure version of, and we're about to commercialize, is that it significantly decreases fibrosis. So fibrosis is a cell death process. It's basically the process by which the heart dies. This molecule has been shown to significantly insulate in experimental models against fibrosis. It reduces important markers of cardiac damage, such as BNP, which are elevated significantly in heart failure patients. It improves the left ventricular function of the heart, so the ability of the heart to function as a pump to either fill with blood or eject and oxygenate tissues of the body. It reduces cardiac inflammatory cytokines. You'll read in the media now, and certainly in the scientific media, that there's this cytokine storm that occurs, which is this massive and systemic inflammatory response caused by the immune system trying to kill the virus that basically causes massive organ failure and death in patients. And importantly, cannabidiol reduces a number of very important pro-inflammatory or inflammatory cytokines. And most importantly, it reduces cardiac injury associated with elevated troponin levels. And if this marker is just ever so slightly elevated in the blood of patients, we know those patients have a much higher risk than otherwise to the extent that it is not elevated. And we really need to take extra special care of those patients. So with all of this as a background, we believe this agent has significant potential in the treatment or the cardioprotection against one of the primary targets of this deadly virus, which is the cardiovascular system. So at Cardiol, we have three important programs. We've developed the most sophisticated form of cannabidiol in the world with the highest level of purity and stability. We see a potential to generate significant revenues to offset our development costs and generate profitable revenues as we develop high-value biotech assets. We've just recently signed an exclusive national distribution agreement with who we believe is the most important distributor of medicinal cannabinoid treatments in the country, which is Loblaw Shoppers Drug Mart, obviously a widely recognized, trusted brand in pharmacy distribution, because we are focused exclusively and specifically on medical use of this important molecule. We also have a very important program being initiated at leading cardiac centers around the world in acute myocarditis. That's basically a big medical term for inflammatory heart failure. And you're going to hear a lot more about myocarditis because myocarditis is now a significant new cause, or COVID-19 is now a significant new cause of myocarditis, and it's leading to death in these patients. And then we have a program addressing a mass market opportunity that we plan to partner with the multinational pharmaceutical company specializing in cardiovascular disease, which is targeting heart failure, where we've innovated an entirely new way to deliver this important molecule in a highly strategic way, in a highly targeted way, directly at failing heart tissue. All of our developments are supported by global partnerships. We have exclusive partnerships with two of the key players for the supply of our medicines. Delton Pharmaceuticals is an organization I've worked with for over 25 years in my prior heart failure company, and again now with Cardiol. The owner, founder, and CEO of Delton Pharmaceuticals is a shareholder and serves on our board of directors. And they have an extensive expertise in formulating medicinal cannabinoid formulations. And we also have the largest supplier in the world as a partner for medicinal cannabinoids at 100% purity to supply the Delton formulation program to provide access to the global markets. So the key advantages of our formulation is its stability, its purity, its manufacturing standard, the fact that this provides reproducible dosing for patients irrespective of what they're using this treatment for. And most importantly, we have engineered this formulation to be THC free. So there's no psychoactive component, there's no addictive component. This can be used in an elderly population without risk of intoxication. And more importantly, To the extent that it's being used in a pediatric population, we know that THC has an impact. We don't fully understand its impact on the developing brain. So much so that the Pediatric Society of Canada and the Royal College of Physicians, which govern the practice of all physicians in the province of Ontario, they mandate that physicians not prescribe THC to anyone under the age of 25. So we basically have developed a program for the fastest growing segments of this marketplace. And to give you some context as to how our product is profiled, I would just suggest to you that the product Epidiolex, which has been approved by the FDA for the treatment of epilepsy, developed by a New York Stock Exchange multi-billion-dollar company, if you look at our product relative to that product, it's essentially identical. It's the same amount of drug, same consistency, same purity. It's an oral formulation. It's manufactured to the same standard. But we actually have a lower level of the psychoactive component THC. We have the lowest in the world. And that's important when we're dealing with either a pediatric population or a population that may have risk for intoxication or drug side effects. And possibly in the case of a cardiovascular risk population that we're developing it for, we know that THC levels can influence arrhythmic disturbances in the heart and may have adverse effects in a high-risk population. So we have aligned ourselves with the most dominant brand in prescription cannabinoids in the country and prescription medicine in general. This is a nationwide distribution network through Shoppers Drug Mart. They have a brand that patients know and trust. They have an alliance with a very efficient mechanism for patients to obtain an authorization or a prescription for this medicine. And most importantly, they're pharmacy and medically focused, which is exactly why we've developed our brand and positioned it as a medically focused brand. And the revenue opportunity we see commencing imminently is in the fastest growing segments of this market, which include pediatrics, where pediatricians well know that this molecule influences seizure disorders. But more importantly, we see this vast market opportunity, which is now $1.2 billion in the Canadian market for pain management, inflammation, anxiety. And of course, we all know that we're living in an anxiety-riddled world. And that's leading to a real drive for this medicine. And then the fastest growing segment in this marketplace is people over the age of 65, where THC can lead to intoxication effects. What we really want to talk about today is in the context of this COVID nightmare, is the impact on the cardiovascular system and its ability to protect. So we have a program in acute myocarditis, which is a major cause of sudden cardiac death in young people. A lot of people think about heart disease as a disease of the elderly. Myocarditis does not discriminate. Myocarditis takes the lives of young people. It's the leading cause of sudden cardiac death in people under the age of 30. This phenomena and the risk profile is also being exacerbated now by the COVID-19, which now represents a significant new cause of myocarditis-related mortality. And this slide just illustrates the impact of cannabidiol and its ability to protect against this insidious insult on the heart. Myocarditis has always been caused by a virus primarily, where a virus such as the influenza virus and now the COVID virus becomes resident in the heart, and our immune systems try to kill that virus and overreact and end up killing cardiac tissue. This is illustrated on the right side. The top panel is healthy tissue. The middle panel is fibrous tissue being assaulted by the immune system and dying. And the bottom right panel shows the ability in the presence of myocarditis for cannabidiol to protect that tissue. And we're partnered and collaborating with globally renowned centers, including the Ottawa Heart Institute, world-renowned for its work in myocarditis and heart failure in general, the Mayo Clinic in the United States and other major centers in the US, and the Charité in Berlin, which is one of the largest myocarditis practices in all of Europe. And then with respect to our larger program, we're also looking at heart failure, which by any measure is a major medical challenge. It remains the leading cause of death and disability in the Western world. It's driven by diabetes, obesity, and high blood pressure, and all those factors are on the rise. And basically what happens, you get a fibrous thickening in the chambers of the heart, and the heart simply can't function properly. You get fluid retention, and patients feel like they're suffocating. We worked with the Nanotech Institute of the University of Alberta to design an entirely new way to deliver this important molecule to the drug or to the heart by basically disguising it as a smart treatment, as a water-soluble chemical, so it could last in the body much longer. And this was demonstrated at the world-leading DeBakey Heart Center, where the first heart transplant was ever performed in the United States. They induce heart failure by inducing high blood pressure. And we know that high blood pressure causes strain on the heart becomes enlarged and inflamed. So we encapsulated the drug, we introduced it into this model system. And interestingly, when we put a fluorescent tag on it, the glowing nanostructures that we were introducing this active agent through only appeared in the dying heart tissue. So it's specifically targeting the site of disease. And this is illustrated on electron microscopy, where in the bottom right panel, I'll draw your attention to it, those red dots within the blue spindle-shaped cells are our nanostructures carrying drug. And the blue cells are the fibrotic cells, which are the cells which cause cell death in the heart. So essentially, we're transporting a very important medicine directly to the site of disease. We presented this to a globally renowned panel made up of an international collaboration of MIT, University of Calgary, DeBakey Heart Center, and a world-renowned center in Latin America. And they agreed to sponsor our program with $3 million worth of funding, which has now developed what we believe to be the most sophisticated way to deliver this important molecule in its pure form in the world today.
Thank you very much, and thank you, everyone. Gren Schock, our chairman and founder, is on the line, myself, the president of the company, and the head of the Airboss Defense Group, our CEO, Patrick Callahan. Airboss of America is a highly diversified company. We do multiple things, and I'll be talking about those. But firstly, just a couple of disclaimers. If we can go to page 2, please. There's some forward-looking information that we'll be talking about. I invite you to read through the disclaimers at your convenience. Nothing unusual, of course, in these first 2 pages. And then moving on to the next page, we essentially started out as a rubber company. And rubber is an essential product throughout the world. It's everywhere. And what many people don't know is it is sustainable because the rubber is tapped from trees, as is maple syrup, and it's polymerized and used in the production of rubber compounds that then have very specialized functions. And it's on that base of that technology that we service almost every industry you can imagine. On this next page here, you can see that we are North America's second largest custom compounder of rubber solutions. And we have 3 distinct companies. The first company is our rubber compounding group that produces this rubber for a variety of end uses. We have a second company, Airboss Engineered Products, which makes rubber to metal bonded parts for vehicles. And a third company that you'll be hearing most about today, because that's where most of our COVID-19 response is centered around, is the Airboss Defense Group, which started out using that rubber proprietary technology to build chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear protective equipment and PPE for soldiers that are in the field. In terms of our company's North American presence, you can see here on the next slide that we have facilities in Newmarket, Ontario, Kitchener, Ontario, Actonville, Quebec, Beaumont, Quebec, Auburn Hills, Michigan, Landover, Maryland, Scotland Neck, North Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, and a joint venture in Kuala Lumpur. We have over 2 million square feet of production space, and 1 million of it is in the Kitchener, Ontario plant, which is a highly valuable piece of property on 18 acres in downtown Kitchener. That gives you a very quick overview of our company with the 3 business units. But today we really wanted to focus on our COVID-19 response. And I'll pass at this point over to the CEO of the Airboss Defense Group, Patrick Callahan.
Great, thank you, Chris. Thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Patrick Callahan. I'm the CEO of Airboss Defense Group. As Chris said, Airboss of America has quite an installed base in North America, focusing on a number of industries. But today, I'm going to take some time and tell you a little bit about our defense holdings and what we've been doing in Airboss Defense Group. Airboss Defense Group was founded primarily with the thought of becoming a survivability business. My background, I've spent 20 years in the defense space. At the beginning of that time, I was a user. Spent 10 years active in reserve military. So as I go through some of the story, both about defense and our COVID response specifically, I've been on all sides of this story. So the beginning of my professional life was I was on the receiving end of using many of the products that I'll talk about today. But specifically what we're going to focus on today is the biological response and what we're doing to respond to the spread of this virus and trying to do what we can, specifically at AirBoss Defense Group, to help stop that virus and bring that bell curve down. AirBoss Defense Group was founded as a merger between two businesses, Critical Solutions International, which is a company for the last 20 years that is focused on counter-improvised explosive device, counter-explosive work, providing a vehicle that I'll talk a little bit about at the end of the presentation, and the chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear protective equipment from AirBoss Defense. And the thought process behind these two businesses was bringing two companies together that had a different product portfolio, but also different specialties. Critical Solutions was really focused on marketing and sales and program management and aftermarket service support, where AirBoss Defense was really focused on engineering, product development, and production. And so what we've created in this merger is the full value chain of a survivability defense business, with the thesis at the beginning of growing it, focusing really on the defense side. But over the last several months, what we've seen with the COVID response, that there is another market that is actually a larger market, that where our products have as much impact, if not more. And that's in the first responder and the medical workers market as well. This slide tells you a little bit about where that thesis came from. AirBoss Defense has legacy products from rubber manufacturing that have been servicing warfighters both in the US and internationally for decades. If you look left to right, I've been personally wearing these products for a number of years. You can see from the cold weather boot all the way to the right to one of our newest products, which is the low burden mask, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. We have really specialized in protective equipment to protect warfighters against, again, cold weather environments, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, or even explosive threats. But this slide speaks to the amount of backlog the company had even prior to the COVID response and the amount of need that we're seeing from the first responder market. The overall need for defense products has grown dramatically over the past several years, and I'll speak about this again at the end of the presentation, but the administration has been very clear that with the defense budget that's been published, they are addressing a very dilapidated military within the U.S., a military that's been dilapidated over the last 20 years from extreme use, both in Afghanistan and Iraq and the rest of the Middle East. And many of the programs and product sales that you're seeing on this page speaks to that need. Restocking shelves, improving products, taking some legacy products that have not been serviced over several years, and putting both research money in and procurement dollars in to bring better equipment to the warfighter. An example of that is the product you see to the far right, and it's a great example of the reason that at CSI we focused on the engineering and product development expertise that AirBoss Defense had. The low burden mask to the far right is an example of product development by taking a lot of the user feedback that AirBoss had heard for a number of years about current mask technology, filter technology in the chemical biological world, and using that to create what we believe to be the best-in-class gas mask in the world. Over the last 2 years, there have been two major global competitions for gas masks, both in Australia and Canada, and AirBoss Defense won both of those in straight-up competition against the largest gas mask and filter companies on the planet. So this slide really speaks to, again, prior to the COVID outbreak, this company and this merger to create AirBoss Defense Group was on a trajectory to really grow. And at the end of our first quarter, not including the COVID response, that theory, that thesis, was no longer a theory. We were tangibly working and tangibly growing, addressing the defense market that, in parallel to COVID response, continues to grow and continues to have a dramatic need because there are wars still raging around the world. The Middle East is obviously a focus for us. Eastern Europe is a focus for us. But the defense side of our business is still extremely strong and growing at a rapid pace. What COVID-19 did for us was shift our focus both strategically long-term, and I'll speak to that, but also in the short term, having shaped our business to be able to respond rapidly for the threat that we saw growing internationally a few months ago, and obviously what's happened here domestically over the past 45 to 60 days. What we tried to do when the coronavirus and COVID-19 reared its ugly head internationally, we knew we had several products on the first responder and medical side of our business that could be a huge help in both mitigating the threat, encapsulating the threat in certain areas, and stopping the spread. We reached out to dozens of U.S. correspondents, U.S. federal agencies, anywhere from the CDC to the World Health Organization to the State Department to the White House Task Force. You name it, we were reaching out to these agencies to try and address and help internationally the best we could. If you look left to right, these are just a sampling of some of the products that we knew could be of assistance, and some of the feedback we got from the international community at first, that these were things they were looking for. Both our personal protective equipment, boots and gloves, although they're rated to protect against things as serious as sarin gas, mustard gas, and serious chemical threats, they will obviously help in the biological threat world as well. We got a lot of response internationally, and the good news is that we were already producing and are producing hundreds of thousands of these products for the defense market here in the US. So we were in production and capable of producing more at a very high rate for the international customer. Moving to the right, the Isopod, one of our products that's gotten a lot of traction is a casualty transportation shelter that allows you to, in a negative pressure environment with a filtered solution, allows you to encapsulate a patient in an Isopod and protect them and the medical worker from whatever the possible contagion that patient has been exposed to. So what it allows you to do is really protect that patient if their immune system has been compromised. You can see the armholes on the side of the Isopod. It also allows the medical workers to continue to do the work they need to do to keep that patient comfortable and to protect the medical worker as well from whatever that contagion is. We got a tremendous amount of feedback internationally, and to date, through the first quarter of this year, we have sold more Isopods in the first quarter of 2020 than we sold all of 2019. Our shelter space, the shelter space is a market that has several competitors. What we focus on being a CBRN company is the ability to create medical shelters, to increase medical capacity, to offer a sterile environment, to offer decontamination. The US DoD has signaled that we are the best in class for decontamination shelters. And again, we saw a huge signal internationally for that product as well. And then finally, our powered air purifying respirator. And really what is important to know about the respirator, and you've probably seen some news about this, what the respirator allows a first responder, a police officer, a medical worker to do is work in 100% confidence that they're protected. It's a filtered solution with forced air that gives you that 100% protection, different from, say, the N95 mask, which is a good product, but in a high shedding environment, like a medical worker is working on in ICUs, you are exposed to a tremendous amount of contagion. And that is the only solution. A filtered solution is the only solution that can give a medical worker 100% confidence that they are protected. So what shifted is we did get a tremendous amount of international feedback, but within about 30 days of those conversations, our focus shifted to the domestic need. The same conversations with the same agencies that we had for about 30 days internationally shifted to what can you do domestically? Working with the White House Task Force, working with FEMA, working with all 54 state and territory SEMA offices, so the state emergency management agencies that control the response for their states and regions, the National Guard, the Corps of Engineers. We got the same feedback at a much larger scale that we were getting internationally. What can you provide for personal protection equipment? How many isopods can you ramp up and build? Because we have got massive amount of need to transport patients. What can you do for shelters? Because we've got a need on the medical side to increase capacity in places like New York, Washington State, California, Massachusetts. These probably resonate with things that you've heard on the news. And then finally, and most importantly to us right now, because we're executing, what can you do for a respirator mask capability? We work directly with the White House Task Force. We got a call, as we had gotten from a number of other agencies. How many of these can you make, and how fast can you make them? We were in a very good position because of our partnership and ownership of AirBoss of America. We have the ability to tap into an incredible supply chain and an incredible surge capability to make a tremendous amount of product quickly. So we were able to commit to making 100,000 respirators and 600,000 filters in 90 days. Obviously, the feedback from FEMA was excitement, and we were put under contract in a very rapid fashion. So we're currently delivering product now. We've delivered product to New York, to DC, to Indiana, and on a weekly basis, we are shipping palletized hoods, filters, masks all around the country. So the PAPA response is the largest example, but I can give you analogous examples of several other products in several other agencies that have reached out. And again, the theme is, how many can you make as fast as possible to help them with this bell curve and to help over the next 60 days. Beyond that, we are in conversations right now about post-COVID-19 as far as the peak of the threat, and what can we do as far as stockpiling beyond this initial threat. And that's really important for us strategically. What we're trying to understand as a survivability business that focuses primarily on defense is, what is the post-COVID-19 emergency response going to look like? This space has been very difficult for us. It's a very fragmented space, and I'm speaking about the first responder, hospital, municipal space. Generally speaking, prior to COVID-19, companies would have to reach out to thousands of different customers around the country and around the world, working with municipalities, working with different police agencies, different fire departments, different SEMA offices, and we do believe some of that will continue post-COVID-19. But what we are hearing is that first responder equipment and where we stand today as far as stockpiling is not where it needs to be. We were in a very bad position as a country to respond to a biological threat. I've been in these conversations. We've had several strategic conversations with large acquisition authorities that generally focus on defense acquisition. They have been brought on board to think about post-COVID-19 and what the strategy is to grow stockpiling and to grow the amount of equipment that municipalities can reach into and stockpile at certain hospitals in certain cities to make sure that we are not ill prepared again. So we're focused right now on ramping up and delivering as much as we can for the immediate threat, but we are in conversations about the ongoing strategic thought process about how we're going to be doing acquisition post-emergency. And so what we believe it will look like is that it'll look somewhat analogous to how we attack and go after the defense space. The defense space is a much more centralized acquisition process. You've got a handful of acquisition authorities that are responsible for acquiring product for the Air Force, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard. And it's a much faster process because you're not reaching into thousands of municipalities and trying to work through all of that bureaucracy. You're focused on a handful of acquisition authorities where you compete, you win, and you deliver. And we believe that that's the direction they're going to be going with a number of these products. And the good news for AirBoss Defense Group is that we have been identified as probably one of the handful of businesses that is proving itself to have best-in-class technology for first responder and medical workers, and we're proving ourselves by being able to deliver at a very, very rapid pace, which is what the defense world and I think what the first responder world is going to need going forward post-emergency. So this slide again just speaks back to our original thesis and the direction we are going as a business. We are a survivability business. We are a defense company. We focus both domestically and internationally. We still have a tremendous amount of international need for all of the business units you see on this slide. We break our company down into 4 basic business units. And I've spoken about each of these a little bit. But under the wearable products, whether it be our rubber boots and gloves, our cold weather equipment, we are still delivering these, again, in the tens and hundreds of thousands to Defense Logistics Agency, for the US, and for a number of international customers around the world. Gas masks and filters, we have both tactical and first responder products. So for the White House Task Force and FEMA program that we're working on right now, that is a non-tactical medical response system. You can see in the picture you're seeing here, that's a tactical system that is sold to both the National Guard and the US military, international militaries. So we are beyond just gas masks and filtration masks. We are one of the largest producers of filters in the world. In our Landover, Maryland facility, we produce hundreds of thousands of both chemical and biological filters that are NATO rated, which means they can fit into our equipment or other mask providers around the world. So it allows us to both compete with our own equipment, but installed bases for other masks that could be possibly installed around the planet. Collective protection, we're working right now, as I said, on responding to increase medical capacity for the first responder space for the COVID response. But we have a number of programs that we're working on for the defense space. Our decontamination shelter, as I said before, has been identified as the best in class in the U.S. market. And the U.S. DoD has already created a program of record, which means Congress has identified decontamination shelters as needing to be programmed and sustained for 10 to 20 years. So it's a very large program, and we are in the beginning of that competition right now. We are positioned very, very well. And then finally, route clearance. The route clearance space is one that continues to be extremely important. And what route clearance is the search and mitigation of explosive devices. The vehicle that you see here is the Husky mounted detection platform. It's the first ever mine-protected vehicle that was introduced to the U.S. military in the Afghan and Iraq wars. It's designed to identify explosive threats. It's designed to actually be destroyed or be blown up. But the exciting thing about a Husky is that in over 7,500 mine blasts and IED explosions, we have never lost an operator to blast, ever, in the history of that platform. There's no other vehicle in the world, including armored tanks, armored platforms. There's no other platform in the world that has that kind of record. So we are currently delivering dozens of Huskies internationally, both to Eastern Europe and to the Middle East. And we still have an installed base of over 1,000 Huskies that we are working with the U.S. government every day on spare parts, sustainment, and training.
So I'd first like to introduce my colleague, Tina Byers. She's going to be moderating the panel session. I'll let Tina take it from here.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. And just as a reminder, I believe that Terry Howlett of Ovation Science is back on with us, and so is Hilton Kieran at iFabric. So thanks for coming on this panel. So basically we'll have a discussion about the opportunities and shifts in your businesses due to the COVID crisis, and then open it up to Q&A a little bit after that. And then I just ask the audience to let me know who the questions are directed to beforehand. In terms of the shortages of PPE, hand sanitizer, and testing kits that we've seen have become a global issue as the pandemic develops. There are new hotspots around the globe where demand is a huge problem and lack of supply. What opportunities are you seeing to sell your products globally? Patrick, maybe you'd kind of talked about this in your presentation, so maybe you can start with that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we started early. So when we were monitoring the corona outbreak and what was going on internationally, this is our business. We focus on PPE and providing biological response equipment around the world. So we had already identified that a threat like this virus could present an opportunity for us specifically because it's what we do. Obviously, the sad truth of it is that what we're seeing domestically is true internationally, which is nobody is positioned well with PPE. No one has been positioned well with PPE on the defense side when it comes to a biological response, but specifically on the first responder and the medical responder side, nobody really understood how contagious this threat was. And so the PPE that was available, like the N95 mask, really wasn't appropriate for that environment. And so the problem they really identified was that people were getting sick and sicker at a much more rapid pace. So what we finally saw was the need for a filtered solution, like we see in the chemical world, was a necessity. And we're now getting, obviously, with what you saw on the FEMA contract that we're delivering today, we're getting the same demand signal internationally, both in Africa, in Europe, in Eastern Europe, all over the world, for the need for a filtered solution to protect those medical workers.
And Terry, you recently announced the partnership in Israel. How are you being affected on a global basis?
Well, there's two things that we will do. Is number one is we manufacture the product at two locations, one here in Las Vegas and very shortly in Ontario, within weeks. They're all set up, ready to go. So we can finish the product and ship globally from there. However, sometimes because of distance and everything else, it would be more economical to produce it in a different country. And so we're working on some of those areas, which hopefully we'll have some news out shortly on that. And we will license it out to those companies, and they will source it. And they know how to do that. They're in the business of manufacturing skincare products, so they will be able to source it locally in their own country, the raw ingredients and the packaging, and we will ship them one of the ingredients here, which is our secret sauce, so to speak, to be able to control who we are. But it's interesting, when we first started out, we could buy ingredients, it wasn't an issue, but all of a sudden the ingredients and packaging became a real problem. I mean, the hand sanitizer, alcohol, I mean, all the bottles seemed to be gone, and we were begging, borrowing, stealing from different people to get it done. But it's interesting now that we're able to, we talk to companies where we need them and say, well, look, I've got a client that ordered, 500,000 and they don't need it right now bottled, but let me call and see if they'll lend some back. And that's happening. And people say, sure, let them back to that company. And when their order comes in, replace it with ours, because we're just going to sit in our ware. So a lot of cooperation going on, which is even down to raw ingredients. So we're very impressed with that. And so we right now are not as concerned as we were a month ago about supply.
Can you talk about maybe the length of the sales cycle and how that's changed during the crisis, and how you've been able to adapt to that? Obviously, you mentioned just trying to get a little bit creative and helping each other out. But how much of a change has the sales cycle been?
Well, I don't think that's been our biggest issue. Has been at the very beginning getting inventory and everything else. And so in one sense, we have interest from different people and for distribution of the product. And so we're able now to handle that better than what we did in the past. During the break here, I just got a call from Canada from a major distributor and was able to handle that with them. Because they're looking for what we have, and obviously they're watching your show. Thank you very much. So it's coming out right now, and as one of the gentlemen said, Patrick said, I think it's not going away. It's a worldwide situation. So where before, when you're a company thinking, well, I've got the United States or I've got Canada to take care of, it's a global situation and a global opportunity.
Are you seeing any other areas of the business expand as a result of relationships that you have with some of these more recent partnerships?
Yeah, we are. As a matter of fact, because of our situation in Canada for manufacturing, they've introduced the situation in another country in Asia, who can help us manufacture there to distribute through Asia the product, which helps us a lot as we have interest from those countries, but instead of making it and shipping it from North America. So again, everybody's helping out, and we appreciate all of that.
Yeah, on our side, we're actually seeing, because of how rapidly we're responding on the COVID side, a lot of the defense partnerships that we have and defense customers that we have have actually, called me or written me. We're in the middle of a very large pan-European competition for our low burden mask with 28 different countries involved, and they're monitoring how we're performing in this COVID response. And I've gotten notes from the folks in Europe just saying it's incredible what your company is doing on the healthcare side. So for us, obviously, we're focused on saving lives, but it's great help for us to make sure we're demonstrating to the defense customer that this is what we can do, and this is what we can do for you on the defense side as well.
And obviously, this is potentially a long-term situation. You're working to find ways to ramp up capacity now. Are you going to be able to meet that future demand, or what kind?
I think it was a little bit of a breakup there. But yeah, it's okay. Yeah. So, I mean, a couple of things on our side. As I said before, our work with Airbus of America as one of the largest rubber production businesses in the world, as a defense business based in the U.S., our ability to work with them and their supply chain and their manufacturing capability has really allowed us both to meet the demand of these enormous contracts and the speed in which we're responding. 100,000 respirators in 90 days. We got it directly from FEMA. Nobody else could commit to that kind of ramp. But the great news is once you get to that level of ramp, the ability to sustain it, you're able to do it. And as I think the gentleman spoke about before, we're seeing tremendous output from a number of suppliers that are working their tails off to make sure that materials are not in shortage. The one tough thing about it in the PPE world is for some of these materials, they're used in a number of different products. So if it's a certain material, polyethylene, that's maybe used for a hood, it could be used for booties. So a lot of these companies are stretched in the amount of product they're putting out. But we haven't seen any issues in our supply chain. And we're in discussions now with several customers beyond just say the 100,000 respirators. And we feel very confident that we can meet that.
And Hilton and Terry, obviously licensing is part of your business as well. Are you considering more of a shift towards licensing as you ramp up, or what is the business thought process on that front?
Well, licensing is a big part and will be a big part, and you'll see that soon, because it just takes it takes a lot of it puts the onus back on those individuals in those countries who have better source of goods. It doesn't make sense for us to begin to look to get ingredients from other countries to ship into other countries when they can get it there all locally. And so we see that opportunity in several countries around the world, and that will help us grow our bottom line for sure.
I think that we're looking, as I said earlier, to a blend where we are looking at some license opportunities. We've actually just registered some brands, so we're going to be expanding our offers and with our own in-house brands as well. So I think it's going to be a combination of both.
And Hilton, are you seeing increase in sales for the antimicrobial products as well as a result of this?
Yes, because I think that like everything, COVID's around, but all these other pathogens and problems are still around. So yes, it's just highlighting this whole infection control area of business that instead of us having to push for infection control, unfortunately, COVID has just put the world's eyes in a whole different mindset about infection control, which is just increasing the sensitivity to both antibacterial and antiviral problems.
We did have an interesting question come in. Post the COVID-19 crisis, do you anticipate that government annual healthcare budgets will expand to create additional demand for your products? And Patrick, maybe you want to start. Could the Airbus Defense Group spin off and become a separate entity as this business grows?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know the specifics as to how much or what direction they're going to grow, but I can just tell you from the conversations that I've been party to, there are strategic conversations right now about how do we create a budget line item for PPE, for emergency response, the way that DoD does. So if you think about chemical response, every unit in the US military has chemical response equipment. And chemical threats are there, but it's not a readily actioned use. And this is not something that happens around the world all the time, but we make sure our guys and gals are protected. And so I do see that for the first responder, the federal emergency management agencies, the National Guard Bureau, all of these folks are focused right now on expanding budgets to make sure they can create a stockpile that has them in a position to be prepared for a possible reoccurrence of COVID, but additional threats that could be coming down the line. So I think that has to happen, and I can tell you our company will be working with Congress to make sure it does happen, not just for us, but just to make sure it happens across the board, because we can't find ourselves in this position again.
And is this event changing your own budgets internally as you look at whether or not to outsource product or use capital to allocate it towards your own facilities?
I can tell you from AirBoss Defense Group, what's been good for us is that because of the rapid need, the way in which the government and the federal government have addressed with FEMA, this is the way we do business anyway. Finding a centralized customer to acquire a massive amount of product, to work through a rapid, urgent operational needs environment. We do that with defense all the time. So we're used to working in that kind of environment. And we're hoping they keep some of that. That's what I'm talking about before strategically. We're hoping that they keep that ability beyond this current emergency. We haven't had to expend a lot of capital on our side. We had the infrastructure in place to make product, and we had the partnerships in place and suppliers in place to make sure that we can meet the rapid need.
And we talked about kind of the government's purchasing decisions. Hilton, maybe you can expand on the retail opportunity and how the purchasing mentality will change in that sense going forward.
I think that as we move more into the medical supply space, I think that's going to be a dynamic change for us as a company, because we have really focused more on the retail side. And I think retail is just going to take a little longer, but I think it's very interesting for us. And I don't know if it's more from a PR perspective, but we've had a lot of our major customers start making masks with just to give themselves some good PR, if nothing else. And are they going to be long-term players? They sportswear brands, they retailers. Are they really the right people to be in this space? Probably not. But I think people are just trying to do what they can to help. And of course, with so much manufacturing capability under their belt and with retail being soft, clearly there's materials available that they can switch gears rather quickly to supply PPE of various kinds. So I think it is going to be a bit of a mind shift for us to be more in the medical supply. I think I was just, you got me back on. I got a call while I was on hold from a company in America. They've got 5,000 hairdressing salons. They're worried about protecting their staff because the governors want to open up certain states even ahead of what they want to do. And so they're calling me, how soon can they have our antiviral? And I'm trying to explain the stages where the phones are ringing. The people are getting ready to really protect even outside of the healthcare industry of what the opportunities just are coming in all shapes and areas.
And Terry, obviously hand sanitizer has been sold out everywhere. Do you think your product will be the new hand sanitizer?
Well, we hope so. When you think about it, I read an article the other day on alcohol hand sanitizers, and to be effective, you have to use at least 3 milliliters in your hand. And a lot of people don't do that. They grab the sanitizer and put it on, and they're just a little bit of it. And the fact that it's instant, as I said earlier, you touch a doorknob, you walk away, you touch something else, you pick it up, now you're contaminated. With ours, you're protected for that 4-hour period. So I would think that in the general public, the healthcare industry, the restaurant industry, I think that DermSafe by Ovation Science will be a name that will be well known. very, very shortly.
That's great. Well, we're kind of past the 20-minute mark. We have a couple of minutes before the next session, but just kind of curious about M&A. I think Patrick touched on it briefly, but is now the time to be doing M&A? Are we still early enough in the valuation cycle that you can grab some interesting technology at this point?
Yeah, it's a great question. Just pre-COVID in the defense space, there was some activity on M&A. Things have obviously slowed down as far as people wanting to action because they're worried they're not going to get full value. So our company's in a great position, and our management's done a nice job of managing capital, and fortunate for us, we are a biological response business. So although this is a horrible thing, we are responding and we are executing, and our business is doing well. So we're always looking. The issue right now is that the space and who's coming to market is just very slow. And I think people are probably just waiting to see how the economy comes back to make sure that their values are where they should be.
I guess on the other side of things, are you all targets now that you have such strong demand?
I mean, everybody's got a growth, right? But no, that's not a question for me. That's a question for our management. We're just focused right now on trying to save lives and grow the business.
We have a question from the audience for Terry. I think the question's around the science of the sealant. They're asking when I touch a contaminated surface, I have essentially a contaminated glove. So how am I further ahead protection-wise?
Well, first of all, I don't think gloves are the answer. As our scientist said one day, remember, gloves leak, DermSafe doesn't. But anyways, the point is this: so when you do have a glove on, it's no different than having your hand on that surface. That bacteria or that virus, in this case, will live off that glove until you go wash that glove, and that's not recommended as well. So DermSafe is an invisible glove. It will protect you, as I said earlier, after that 4-hour period. And so that we just believe that, and we've done the studies I've shown this morning. We've done so many more, hundreds and thousands of dollars worth of studies to show that this product is there. I mean, and if you're going to wear a glove, make sure you got DermSafe on first. Put that and then put it on. So if it does leak, or you get something through to your hands afterwards, at least you got the DermSafe on there to protect yourself.
And where are you at in terms of the U.S. Approvals? Are you going through that process?
Yes, we are. Yeah. As I said, we have approval in Canada, and because Health Canada is approved, automatically gives us approval in other countries, but the U.S. FDA is of course different. Yeah.
Do you have a sense of timeline for that?
I wish I did. I wish I did. I could get on a mountaintop and scream then, but I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's interesting to see what you guys are doing and obviously keeping busy. So thank you for joining the panel and for everyone for attending. I'm glad to see that you're turning these businesses and taking a crisis and turning that into an opportunity to help people. So we'll have a bit of a short break right now and then shift into the diagnostics and treatments for COVID in the second half of these presentations.
Welcome back, and thank you for participating in Adelaide Capital's first virtual conference, COVID-19 and Healthcare. We're glad you're here, and we hope you stay throughout the afternoon to learn more about the exciting things Canadian-listed small caps are doing to help fight this global pandemic. So before we dig into our session on treatment and testing, I'd like to remind those of you who are just joining us that we are live streaming this event on YouTube on Bright Light Media's channel, and we will be posting a replay within a few days on Adelaide Capital's YouTube channel. We've been building a ton of high quality content on that channel, and we look forward to offering more webinars and informative pieces like the interview I did last week with Rahim, our keynote speaker. We had a couple interviews about biotech investing, so be sure to check that out, as well as his speech at 4:15 Eastern today, entitled Signal from the Noise, A Compass to Finding COVID-19 Investment Opportunities. And now let's get back into it. This session is all about testing and treatment. Questions can be typed in the Q&A box at the bottom throughout the presentation, and will be answered at the end of each company's presentation. Whatever questions are not being addressed within the 20-minute segment can be addressed in the panel session if time permits. You can also email your questions to info@adcap.ca. So first up in this session, we have Dr. Armand Boney, who I had the pleasure of listening to speak a few weeks ago on a Bloom Burton webinar. Not only did he provide practical advice on dealing with COVID-19, he also provided hope and inspiration, something that I think we all need in our lives right now. Dr. Boney is CEO of Apili Therapeutics, a company I'm always very pleased with myself when I say the name correctly. So, Dr. Boney, do I get a thumbs up? How'd I do?
Good job.
Okay,
yeah, you
great.
got it.
Apili is a pharmaceutical company that's been focused on building and advancing a diverse portfolio of anti-infective programs. So thanks for joining us today, Dr. Boney. Please give us an overview of Apili and some of the things you've been working on in infectious disease treatment.
Sure. So thanks, Deborah. Thanks everybody else, and the panelists have been great today. Just let me know if the audio is okay.
Yeah, you're great.
Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I think what I'm going to do that's a little bit different than some of the other folks have done is I'm going to talk certainly about Apili, but what I'm also going to do is try and put it in the context of how we're approaching the COVID-19 problem. Like many other companies, we have a number of directions, and I think what may be a little bit different is to try and show you what our approach has been to understanding the scope of the problem and then how to address it. And so, as you said, Apili is really about the global fight against infectious diseases. And there's our disclaimer and forward-looking statement as a public company. Our lawyers will now be happy with me. I think it's worth just mentioning that the critical need for antimicrobial R&D is not lost on us, but at Apili, it certainly has been a driving force beyond COVID-19. And I think antimicrobial infections are on pace to grow and will surpass deaths worldwide from cancer. And I think that's certainly something that we are focused on, not only here, but beyond COVID-19. And so really what we do that's a little bit different is we're not grounded in any particular technology. We are always trying to tackle whatever global infectious diseases in front of us based on this idea that we're a portfolio company. We were founded by an investment bank, and in full disclosure, I'm a member, a founding partner at Bloom Burton & Co. And so we are very transactional. We build a diversified pipeline of programs based on not only my experience, but the team's experience. And, those are certainly listed here. And you'll notice I'm not highlighting COVID-19 specifically, but we are addressing those needs. And so the question then becomes, how do we, as a number of people who are trained in the space, myself as a physician and a scientist in infectious diseases, a number of PhDs on our team, we approach these issues with a scientific bent, but this idea again of trying to drive a pipeline that addresses problems that we think are tractable. And so one of the things that I'd like to talk about is where we are right now. And I am certainly confused by the level of noise in the system and the amount of news that we're confronted with. And so I thought I'd talk about a couple of different therapeutic options and then walk through an example of how we might address and have been addressing some of the problems in the diagnostic space, because I think that's also very telling. So remdesivir, for all of those who have heard, is one of a couple of different therapeutic options. How do we treat COVID-19? Remdesivir is an investigational drug. It's given intravenously. And it's what's called a broad spectrum antiviral. It's been used a lot. It's one of the products that I had the pleasure of working with when I was at FDA during the Ebola outbreak. And some of these have come back again because they do have broad activity. So when we look at these, we start to look at them scientifically. And I think as folks are trying to figure out where the opportunities in the space may be, I'm hoping to leave you with how we approach some of these products. We look first at the science. How does this thing work? In this case, it terminates RNA transcription. It works against SARS-CoV-2, so it has broad activity. And it works against a number of other coronaviruses, and the trials are out there. What I might add is that, today there was news disseminated that remdesivir didn't work. There was some leaked news. And so how do we know what's important here? And I guess I would highlight that really what we should be looking for in all of these products are randomized controlled trials, large trials that are aimed at understanding whether and when these drugs actually work. To put it in context, remdesivir, Gilead product, great in vitro evidence of activity, but it didn't work against Ebola. And so we didn't know that until we ran the trials. And so I guess I would caution, as we look at all of these products, let's keep in mind that the gold standard, the randomized controlled trial, is really what we should be looking for. There really are no shortcuts. And when we take those shortcuts, we run the risk of really getting it wrong. And so with that, I'll jump to another example here, one that's in the news a lot. It's certainly got a lot of play from politicians and others claiming that hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine is the answer. And I think the jury is still out, but I think we're starting to gather more information that hydroxychloroquine not only may not work, it certainly doesn't seem to work in the sickest patients based on the clinical trials that have been run. But it also has a number of safety problems. And one of those is something called QT prolongation or heart rhythm or rhythm disorders. Anyone who's taking chloroquine, for example, also knows as an antimalarial, you have very, very vivid dreams and other side effects, safety effects as well. Hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine, they're oral, which is great. They are used, the trade name is Plaquenil, used for certain inflammatory conditions and autoimmune disorders. But again, you have to do the trials in order to know whether these things work. And so we spend a lot of time with our scientific team looking for opportunities by first starting with the science and then moving into whether or not these things work in a randomized controlled trial, large trials that are designed to really look at efficacy as well as safety. And so I would say that as all of the listeners are out there looking for potential new products, ask those questions. We certainly ask those questions of scientists all the time. Where are the data that suggests this works in a large informed clinical trial? And I think that will start to point us in the right direction. It's not the quick or easy way to do things. It takes a lot of work, but I think it's certainly worthwhile. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about diagnostic tests. And I have to say, very early on in the process, I asked our scientific team to go ahead and take a look at the tests that were available on the market, because I could see that not only those early tests, those RNA-based, DNA-based and RNA-based tests were valuable to see who was sick, but also the post-illness tests, those antibody tests. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that and why I think that's important, both from a public health standpoint, and then also as, again, people are looking for opportunities and companies that are making all kinds of claims on how we might be able to evaluate the usefulness of those tests. When I asked the team to go and take a look, we found no fewer than 40 antibody-based tests, primarily coming out of other countries, where folks were making claims about their efficacy, saying it was 90% sensitive or specific. And so what does all of that mean in the context of how these tests work? To first look at why testing, I think I put up here on the left-hand side a snapshot of early COVID-19 testing per capita. And what you'll see is that in the United States, we did a pretty poor job of testing a large population. And I think there's a direct relationship between the number of tests per million people or per capita and the eventual outbreak. The United States, as of March 11th, had done 7,700 tests approximately. We have certainly the most number of cases in the world, and I would argue that we are probably underreporting a lot of those cases. In contrast, South Korea was very, very aggressive about their testing, and I think they were able to then test, trace, figure out who was sick and who was around them, quarantine, and then do some follow-up testing. So I have to say the testing becomes very, very important. So understanding what those tests are is also an important factor in helping to control the disease. And so if we look at the testing windows that are out there, I think it's informative to look at where the tests are and where they sit during these windows. Early on in COVID-19, you certainly have a number of you have an asymptomatic stage, which is quite different than some other diseases. Probably 20 to 30% of folks are asymptomatic based on the data that I saw in the last couple of days, depending on where you are. You then have onset of symptoms, and then you have a full-blown illness, and then you have a recovery period. And so I would argue that we can break the testing windows up into two big areas, that asymptomatic and onset of symptoms stage. When can we discover that someone is actually has replicating virus that can be transmitted to others? And that's that blue curve that we see in the chart. And those are RNA and antigen-based tests that we saw very early on in the process. And they're very sensitive and specific, but they're lab-based tests for the most part early on. Some have flipped a little bit, and that allows us to determine who's sick and who's likely to spread the virus to others. As we are exposed to virus, our immune system becomes activated, and we have a specific immunoglobulin or immune system molecule that becomes detectable. That's IgM. That's an antibody. And then we have a longer-lived IgG antibody that remains in the blood and provides long-term immunity. And so those are those IgM, IgG tests that you see for those antibody tests. And the importance there is that those antibody levels tell you that while you may be outside of that area where you're actually sick and spreading virus, it will tell you that you have been exposed previously. And once you've been exposed, the thought is to be determined that you have some sort of immunity from getting sick again. And that will allow us, of course, to get back to what may be more normal functioning economically. I would caution that we don't actually know what the level is that provides long-term immunity yet, but it is a measure. And so those are those antibody tests. A lot of these tests go on to claim that they're very sensitive and specific. And they use terms like a positive predictive value. How likely is the test to demonstrate that if you test positive that you actually have that you have been exposed, and the negative predictive value, the opposite of that. And so I would say, why is that important? It's important to know that those numbers actually mean something. And so let's just assume for a second, for a practical example, let's look at how positive predictive value works, because a lot of these tests label it as such. And so, that becomes an important function of how these tests work. And so if you have a workforce of 100 staff to test to determine who's been exposed and who can go back to work, and the true unknown prevalence of COVID-19 in your workforce is only 5%, so you have a pretty good understanding of the prevalence, how common the disease is. 5 unknown staff have the illness and 95 have not. And if we apply that test to the population, all of the staff, 5 who have had the illness are tested, and since a test claims that it has close to 90% sensitivity, commonly held out number, again, I saw that on probably 30 or 40 tests that we could get from overseas. 4 people test positive, 95 who haven't had the illness are tested, but with a false positive rate of almost 10%, another 9 people test positive. And so what does that mean? That means that of your staff, 13 people tested positive as having had the illness, but in truth, only 4 of the 13, 30%, have actually had the illness. And so these have real consequences for determining who can go back to work. And as we said before, those people who tested positive but have not had the illness may think that they're immune from getting sick in the future, when in fact they're not. And I think that's a really, really important function of these numbers. We've since learned that a lot of the tests coming from overseas claim that they are almost 90% sensitive. It turns out sometimes they're 20 or 30% sensitive. There's real quality problems. And so before we jump on those numbers, they've got to be tested. We've got to understand what that means. And if we're not careful, we could be exposing a whole bunch of people who may think that they're immune from the disease from getting to getting sick again. And of course, then that's where we get that kind of double rebound. So these are some of the approaches that we take at Apili when we look for opportunities. And I would argue that as you look out at the landscape of therapeutics and testing agents that are out there, we should be applying the same scientific rigor in the middle of the pandemic to our investment opportunities. Science should in fact drive our decision making for these things, and it's certainly really, really important. And so for us, what we've demonstrated is things aren't as simple as they appear when you read a headline quoting a test with 90% accuracy. We had many people claiming wanting to sell us tests or license tests to us with a 90% accuracy. But when we did the work and looked at the opportunities and looked at the population with a low prevalence of illness, a false positive can overwhelm the true positives, as we just saw, and make that test less useful. So we don't, as a company, want to endorse or pull in a technology that is going to not help the problem. And if we apply this scientific reasoning to populations with a higher prevalence of illness, such as workers who have had symptoms and are self-isolated, the usefulness of this positive test result increases. And so I guess not particularly new advice to investors out there looking to assist and help companies with their technology. But we really are in a moment of caveat emptor, buyer beware. Do the work and try and leverage that work to make good decisions.
Well, before I go into the presentation, just want to remind everyone that IMV is a publicly traded company, so so just be aware that my presentation will contain forward-looking statements. Before I go into IMV presentation, I also wanted to give my view on the current situation with the pandemic. I've been in this business of vaccines and immunotherapy for about 22 years now. And I've already lived through 5 pandemics, and you can tell in a way that there is some sort of acceleration happening here. Probably due to increasing global population and especially increasing density of the population, definitely give more opportunity or creates a playground for viruses that they didn't have before. One thing that I find is very different from previous experiences is that I think we have come to a point where we can conclude that there are really only 2 ways we'll be able to get out of this pandemic and go back to a complete normal life. Is if all countries in the world are affected by the coronavirus, so it's either we stop circulation in all countries in the world at the same time, which is going to be very difficult to make happen because very few of us have actually been exposed to the virus. There are numbers coming out from France, for example, where it's no more than 10% people that have been exposed to the virus. Or the other way is really a vaccine, and I think vaccines have been emerging, recently in the news and at the government level as really a key solution for us to go back to normal life and protect our elderly people and also the economy of our countries. And we're, very challenging time for any biotech, obviously, to be in that space, but also a great opportunity for us to showcase, what we can do and the technology we have developed over the years. So IMV, we are developing a new technology. It's a delivery platform, so a technology to deliver drugs. It's based on a new mechanism of action, and to simplify it, it's a way to deliver any type of active ingredient directly into immune cells. And what you can do with that is deliver peptide epitopes. So you can see those peptide epitopes are information molecules that will that have the capacity to direct the immune responses against specific targets, whether it's a target on the cancer cells, that we are developing, or whether it's a target on the virus. That's the same concept. We have some of the best results, that have been produced so far with this technology. So we are one of the leaders in the world. We are focusing on unmet medical needs with the idea that we could benefit from a fast path to market. So a first validation of the technology that will then allow us to greatly, expand on that and go after the multiple applications that this platform technology has. We have a very strong organization, experienced leadership in the team from preclinical development to commercialization, and also the recognition of several partners, including Merck, Wistar, and the NIH in the US. The platform, I won't go through all the details, but it's a lipid nanoparticle technology that deliver the active ingredient at the site of injection, but because they are entrapped in the formulation itself, those active ingredients are protected from degradation after injection, which is very important for any drug. And at the same time, because they are not released from the formulation, they are uptaken instead by immune cells that you have under the skin that patrol the skin all the time. And when they find something, they take it and bring it back to the lymph nodes. And the lymph nodes are really the manufacturing facilities of our immune system. So once we are in the lymph node, that's where we can start, making what we call the programmation of the immune system towards specific targets of interest for cancer or on a virus. We've developed this concept across a number of clinical studies already. We are in multiple phase 2 trials, getting close to conclude those phase 2 trials, and hopefully moving into a more advanced phase 2 that could support accelerated approval, in cancer. You see here we are doing it across a number of cancer indications, from ovarian to lung to bladder and melanoma in the future. Also have been active in the infectious disease space, which is really the topic today. We have already conducted a phase 1 clinical trial with another respiratory virus called the respiratory syncytial virus. It's also an RNA virus like COVID-19, and it's also creating some sort of similar pathology in the elderly population. So that's really the blueprint we are using for the development of COVID-19. I just want to highlight here that in cancer, we have made multiple clinical demonstration of the activity of this technology. But one thing important that I wanted to highlight, because we are working in cancer, we are working with patients that tend to be more than 60-year-old. Actually, a lot of them are more than 70-year-old. They have a lot of different pathologies, cancer, but sometimes other diseases as well. So very difficult patient population to vaccinate. And one thing unique about our technology is that we can make it work in those patients. And that's very important for COVID-19 because, as you very well know, that's the patient population that is most at risk of getting severe disease or dying from COVID-19. Not only we've done the RSV trial, but we've also made a number of demonstrations, in the past pandemics with this technology. You have a number of studies that were made here listed for your reference. So now, what are we doing with COVID-19? We are really focusing on the areas of the virus that have potential to neutralize the virus, so neutralize its entry into human cell, and then prevent the infection. So we have already identified those steps, and moving it into we are already in preclinical studies. And one of the significant advantage that we have with our technology is that the technology itself, the formulation and the peptide epitopes are not based on biologics. So are not based on products that have to be made from cells or biological systems. And this is a great advantage in terms of how fast you can produce something, and the scale, the number of doses you can potentially supply. There's much more capacity for synthetic, manufacturing that there is for biologic in the world. And that's a very important advantage of the approach we are pursuing with this technology. What I'm just showing you here is the results that we've produced with the other virus that I was talking about earlier, the respiratory syncytial virus, RSV. We took an epitope from that virus and vaccinated healthy subjects in a phase 1 trial that was published in 2018. But what was striking in the results that we generated, we did it in the older patient population, was 50 to 64. And I know it's very small, but what you see on the slide are the antibody levels in the blood. So what we're able to show is that with an injection of twice 25 micrograms, so a relatively small dose, we were able to generate 100 times over baseline of antibody levels in 100% of the blood of patients, which are very high antibody levels. And we were also able to show that not only we were able to generate high level of antibodies, but that we were able to maintain those antibodies in the blood over a long period of time. On this slide, you have the data for 1 year. That's the data that we're able to collect. But at 1 year, they were still at peak in the blood, meaning that they were potentially protected for more than 1 year in this study. Again, very important for a vaccine to protect over a long period of time. So what we've done with COVID-19 is we've worked with the sequence of the virus, and especially the corona of the virus, the spike protein, which make the corona of the virus. That's what that is what it's called, the coronavirus. And we've identified in this protein, using immunoinformatics and the know-how that we have in the company, we've been developing this technology for quite some time. What we believe are the top 23 immunological weaknesses of the virus. And this is what we want to base the vaccine on, focusing the immune response on where the weaknesses are. So we have identified those targets, and have successfully produced them. They were formulated in DPX technology, and preclinical studies are ongoing. So what the information we'll get out from this is really a map of where are the weaknesses of the virus and which ones are the most efficacious to neutralize the virus and then potentially prevent the infection in human. That's what we're going to use to decide on what will be the candidate vaccine that we want to test in humans. The human trial that we are working on will really be a demonstration of the potential of our vaccine to, again, generate very high level of antibodies in the blood of patients, and very importantly, maintain those level of antibodies over time, and prove that when you take those antibodies and test them against the virus, they have the ability to neutralize the virus. That would be two important endpoints to provide a level of comfort that this vaccine would have a very good chance to be a preventative vaccine, for COVID-19. So it will be a 52 subject, phase 1, we're going to try 2 different doses, and we're going to look at whether you can acquire, potentially protective level of antibodies after a single dose, which will, save a lot of doses, and also will make it much easier for mass vaccination in the future. This is just, what's upcoming from the company. COVID-19, obviously is an important project for us, but we still are developing a very important potential immunotherapeutic treatment for cancer, and we have not stopped doing that. So we have an updated, updated clinical results for what we call a basket trial. Is a trial that's across several tumor indications, 5 different tumor indications, and we are planning to release an update on the results in June. We are also reaching top line phase 2 clinical results in our ovarian monotherapy trial. We already had some results in February, and we are planning to provide the full top line results in the second part of the year. Same thing for DLBCL, which is a blood cancer, lymphoma. We also have top line phase 2 clinical results upcoming before the end of the year. And hopefully we'll be able to initiate, the phase 1 clinical trial for COVID-19 in the summer, and, with some results in the fall around the potential of the vaccine to protect against COVID-19. This is, information on the company. I won't go through that. You have access to it. And that's it.
So thanks again for the introduction, Deborah, and thanks for the opportunity to present today. So Lexigene is a biotech company. We're smack dab in the middle of this COVID-19 topic, and I'm happy to get into these slides. I'm going to go through them relatively quickly, recognize that they are on our slide deck if you want more details. So as I mentioned, we are a biotech company. We have developed a genetic analyzer for rapid pathogen detection, and this genetic analyzer can be placed at the point of need. Our technology is designed to really bring reference lab quality data to the point of need, all within an hour's time. And this is what's critically mentioned. As Deborah indicated just a moment ago, we're at a position now where some of the tests in the market today are returning poor quality data, which is really impacting the ability of healthcare providers to accurately diagnose their patients and provide high quality care. So as we all are aware, COVID-19 has spread across the world, and it continues to grow in its scope. It is something which is going to be with us for some time. This is not going to disappear and never be seen from again. We do expect this to be a recurring seasonal pathogen in the fall, and so we have to be prepared for a continued outbreak next fall. So what makes this pathogen so difficult is, 1, it's a respiratory pathogen, and 2, it shares many of the same symptoms as other common respiratory pathogens. So if you start feeling ill, you typically have, a cough, runny nose, a fever, etc. These are common symptoms from many viruses that cause respiratory illnesses. This makes diagnosing on symptoms alone nearly impossible. You see here we have influenza, RSV, human metapneumovirus, parainfluenza virus, and rhinovirus, all displaying, features that are similar to COVID-19. And so what we really need is multiplexed testing at the point of need. Multiplex testing is really the ability to screen for multiple pathogens at once. Influenza itself, really a huge problem. We get yearly vaccines. Effectively, 45 million influenza illnesses about per year in the United States, leading to roughly 61,000 deaths. But again, that's just one of the pathogens. If you add on all these other pathogens, you're looking at over 120 million acute respiratory illnesses that are reported in clinics every year in the United States. Obviously, with COVID-19, this number is going to increase. So the market here is huge. The potential is huge. What really is needed are tests that screen for all these pathogens at once and provide informative data rather than a test that only looks for COVID-19. So, as I said, multiplex testing is needed. There are relatively few systems out there that provide multiplex testing. The high quality is absolutely required for healthcare practitioners to trust the data. And so when you look at diagnostics, it's useful in all phases of a pandemic. In the very, very early stages, before it's even classified as a pandemic, it becomes an outbreak, an epidemic, and then finally a pandemic. In the very early stages, that's the opportunity you have to actually contain the virus, prevent it from spreading and becoming an epidemic and then a pandemic. We've passed that point. We're now at the point where we have many different infections happening daily. We're now trying to triage patients, so healthcare practitioners have to figure out who has it, who doesn't, divide them accordingly so that the healthcare can be the most effective at treating individuals who in fact do have the illness. As we flatten the curve and really start having fewer cases, we have the opportunity to go back to do contact tracing, where every single person, their recent contacts are identified, asked to self-quarantine. This is required to really help prevent the spread of the illness. Recognize that pandemics generally last 18 months. This is going to come back in the fall, and there's going to be a continued need for better and higher quality diagnostics as we go forward, and Lectigene is ideally suited to help provide a solution there. So I want to mention some of the other technologies that you might read about in the paper. So one of which is isothermal genetic amplification. There's been one company in particular, Abbott, which has received a lot of press regarding their 5-minute test. I do encourage you to read up. There are articles out there now published stating that the accuracy of that test is insufficient. We expected this. Generally speaking, if it sounds too good to be true, it often is too good to be true. So isothermal tests, like rapid antigen tests, return results very quickly, but generally speaking, they have poor sensitivity. In contrast, those are tests done at the point of care. You have reference lab generated data. A reference lab, their job is to generate the right answer. And so they invariably use RT-PCR for testing. It's considered the gold standard. It's highly sensitive, it's highly specific, and it also provides quantitative information, which is very useful for helping determine how sick somebody in fact is, in addition to their symptoms. The challenge with RT-PCR tests is that they're relatively technical, and you require highly skilled people using multiple different instruments to actually execute the test. What Lectigene has done is we've taken that complexity and reduced it down to a very simple, easy to use instrument that's fully automated and designed to be placed at the point of care. It's designed to be extremely sensitive, extremely fast, and provide that multiplex testing, which I just indicated is extremely important. So where does Lectigene stand out? As I said, there's multiple features that attract healthcare providers, and for that matter, patients. You want to get the right result if you are, in fact, a patient. And so looking at these two other technologies I just mentioned, isothermal and immunoassays. Immunoassays are also just antibody-based tests. On the left here, you'll see that Lectigene specifically with our RT-PCR gold standard chemistry is able to screen for 25, actually 27 different genetic targets at once. In contrast, these other technologies look for just 1 or 2. As a result, when used by healthcare practitioners, they generally return a negative result, which obviously is suboptimal. On the right, time to result, again, most of the comparisons should be made against reference lab test results because that's the gold standard. That takes 24 to 48 hours. Lectigene provides similar quality data, again, within an hour at the point of need, which is really critical for helping curtail the spread of an illness like COVID-19. So a little bit about myself. I am the founder and CEO of Lectigene. I am trained as an influenza biologist, PhD trained. I went on to work at a national lab where I get involved in biothreat detection. The work I did there was funded by the government, and the instrumentation we built was really for biothreat detection. And I used that experience to actually invent a higher quality instrument, which is exactly what Lectigene is reducing to practice, has reduced to practice, and is on the verge of commercializing. So we've licensed the IP from a national lab, and as I said, are on the ease of really commercializing this technology. Some quick highlights. Again, reference quality data at the point of need, within an hour rather than days. Low cost per test, we'll go into that as well. Originally, the company was positioned to target underserved markets such as veterinary diagnostics and food safety. With the COVID-19 outbreak, we have added on this application to our target applications. And really, although it's a horrible event happening, it's provided a great opportunity for Lectigene to pursue FDA clearance in an expedited manner. Traditionally, going through the FDA takes years. We expect to go through the FDA, get EUA clearance for this COVID-19 test before we are commercial. Very high quality data, and we'll get into that later, and we are, of course, patent protected, as I mentioned. So one of the salient features of our technology is open access. This allows an end user to really customize the instrument to look for exactly the pathogens and targets you're interested in. This is not available in any other technology in the market. It will give more power to the healthcare providers to get the test result that they're really most interested in. This is particularly important if this virus mutates or a new strain emerges. Our technology can be more quickly configured to detect a new pathogen than any technology in the market today. Ease of use, effectively less than a minute to start the sample, enter the sample into the instrument, press go, and that's it. No pipetting required. Low cost, critical for cost-sensitive markets. And some of the benefits of genetic testing, we're in a genetics-based world. It provides the sensitivity and specificity that is demanded, both from the provider and the patient side. And the ability to multiplex, again, the value of really getting an informative test result when you do run a test cannot be understated. And because it is a gold standard, it has exceptional accuracy. And again, it can be done quickly at the point of need if you have the right automation. So again, this company was founded 3 years ago. We went through alpha prototype stage where we generated some high quality data in-house. We then created a beta prototype, which was sent out into the field. We went to veterinary diagnostic hospitals. We went to human clinical diagnostic reference labs, and even to reference labs dealing with agricultural industry. Universally, we generated very, very high quality data. The fundamentals of the technology, again, are taking a gold standard technology and just automating it. We've successfully done that. And now we're in the phase of the company are really just working on manufacturing this technology to get it out into the hands of customers. This pandemic has been a horrific thing to experience, but recognize that we've been, avoiding just barely other pandemics in the past. We had SARS, we had MERS, obviously we had Zika virus just recently, Ebola. These are things which have threatened to create, big outbreaks, but fortunately did not. Here we have COVID-19. We've often been worried about avian influenza. The point of this slide is to remind you that COVID-19 is not going to be the only pathogen that affects our lives. On average, a new pathogen emerges every 2 years. Lexigene is going to be very well positioned to not only handle some of the COVID-19 testing that is required, but also be better prepared to help avert the next pandemic, which is really critical. So here's our cap structure. Again, you can read it at your leisure and also available on our website. And some of our consumables, when you sell a technology, you want to tie the customer into a recurring revenue stream. We have two essential components of our recurring revenue stream. In the middle is a single-use cartridge, used just once per sample, very low cost to make, critical component of our system. On the lower right, we have an assay panel. That's where we put the tests to direct the instrument to look for COVID-19 or another pathogen. Very low cost format. Our instrument's a microfluidic instrument. It draws from that test panel repetitively when processing every single sample. So that goes in the instrument just once and stays there for weeks, if not months at a time. So over the next 6 months, we are well along in establishing a quality system that's required for the FDA. We are going to soon be submitting for FDA clearance to use our analyzer for COVID-19 testing. Of course, we're going to be hiring a sales staff, begin manufacturing, which we've actually already started, and selling our technology before the end of Q3. Very proud of the management team. Management team up top is the board of directors, and down below is key management within the company. Collectively, a wealth of experience, both launching products and building value in companies and for long-term growth. Last slide here. Again, we consider ourselves to have a breakthrough technology, fast turnaround time, designed to be placed at the point of need. It can be operated by anybody. High quality data, open access, and low cost. We really do expect this to make an impact, not only in human clinical diagnostics, but also other markets which I didn't have time to address today, like veterinary diagnostics and food safety. These are areas that we've already developed tests for and expect to make an impact this fall as well.
Microbics, of course, is a specialist in infectious diseases. Our company started providing growth media to public health laboratories, culturing different bacterial and viral strains circulating into the community. We then, over the years, moved to actually growing the organisms for the public health labs. And then some years ago, we're invited to actually provide those products to global manufacturers of immunoassays and diagnostic tests. So we're actually a global leader, if not the global leader, in providing or so-called serology tests. And we actually provide a whole series of those products. You can see here all the organisms that we culture at industrial scale, culture, purify, and inactivate in industrial scale in our facilities in Mississauga. So it's a very important company from a global public health perspective, what we do, and we have actually a mitt full of letters recently attesting to our being essential to public health on a global basis. That is about 90% of our current sales is to international companies, including for tests for respiratory pathogens, such as flu, adenovirus, parainfluenza, RSV, and different forms of bacterial pneumonia you can see on the respiratory side. And that, of course, is growing in a couple of areas. One is, of course, as modern medical testing has been rolled out more broadly. We're seeing greater use of our product, not just in North America and Europe, but across Asia-Pacific regions. And more testing going on. As with COVID-19 happening, it's important that frontline providers are aware not just whether a patient has COVID-19, but if they don't, do they have flu or another circulating virus? And if they do have COVID-19, of course, are they co-infected with another virus that's going to make it even more dangerous for them? We also took that expertise and we have gotten involved a number of years ago in providing what we call CAPS, or quality assessment products. And these are the mimics of actual patient samples. And they are used to help ensure the accuracy of medical tests. And if you're testing on an analyzer, however good, or a manual test or automatic test, you always must ask yourself, is the technician making an error in the operation of the test? Has the instrument gone out of calibration? Have the reagents spoiled? Well, the only way you can safely validate your quality system is effectively bookending a run of tests with a known positive sample and a known negative sample. Doing that at the start of a run of tests and doing that at the end of a run of tests. And that is what enables you to have confidence that the 100 or so tests in the middle are actually giving you valid results. And Microbics has been uniquely positioned to do that, because we know how to grow the organisms, we know how to inactivate them, we can augment them if we need to with leading edge biology tools, we know how to formulate these controls, how to stabilize them, and we have the quality systems to validate all that. And this is something we're not chasing COVID-19. This is a business we've been in for a decade. We have provided and become, in fact, one of the leading providers to test the competency and provide the accreditation of clinical laboratories all over the world. And product sales into this niche had plateaued in recent years due to a lack of new product introductions by Microbics, which is something we have absolutely changed. And we initially went about this by also going into two new categories, not just proficiency, which was white label business. Nobody ever saw Microbix name on those products, those samples that would go out to the labs to certify them. So we created two new product lines. One we call Proceed, and the other we call Red. And Proceed is to develop new tests, to help with the development of panels of tests, and to train technicians and labs on new instrument installations. So, for example, there's a very successful analyzer company called Sekisui out of Japan. No new instrument ships from them unless accompanied by a starter kit of Microbix controls, in order that they can validate the new instrument and know that the technicians are trained. And we're doing this work for a number of companies now, and sales to that category began in 2019. And then in September of 2019, we launched our first products under our Red Controls banner, and these sales are directly to clinical labs. So this is the formal quality control of lab testing where patient outcomes are directly affected. And this first product launches were actually in the category of human molecular testing, or our PCR testing for infection with the high-risk types of human papillomavirus that most people carry. A very significant opportunity for Microbix, as there have been no adequate controls available to ensure the accuracy of this sort of testing. And opportunity moving into a $500 million potential market, which would be about 1/10 that amount for the opportunity for controls. And you can see here on slide 15 that respiratory was considered a smaller niche at that time. Of course, that has all changed. And I say that because it is a tremendous precursor for us to be able to apply all this background of expertise in virology and developing controls for infectious disease tests to be able to react quickly to help the public health emergency around COVID-19. So as this became apparent that this was in fact a pandemic and that human-to-human transmission was happening, our team began to work very intensively to develop a Red control, or a couple of Red controls products for COVID-19. And you can see here, this is a chart from March where global cases were about 550,000, were it only still so. What we have developed are controls for COVID-19 testing, the testing for the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and they will work with anyone's molecular test for the virus, which is very important because labs do not want to have to stock a control that only works with one test or with one instrument. They want to be able to offer quality control for all the instruments that they are calling into use. So very, very important. And we've developed controls on Copan flock swabs, the nasopharyngeal swabs that you see being used on the television. We also have a liquid format swabs, and we're announced that when we completed internal and external validation of the product on March 30th. We then refined with working with multiple international test manufacturers to optimize it for use across everyone's instrument. We filed for Health Canada approval and FDA emergency use access on April 13th. We were granted Health Canada medical device establishment licensing, which permits the use of our controls in Canada on April 21st. And in between those, we've already set up with a partner in Vancouver called One World Accuracy, a global training program to validate and accredit labs for COVID-19 and other viral respiratory pathogen testing that will involve availability in 60 countries. About 6,000 laboratories potentially will be trained. That will roll out in June, that testing program, and we will begin shipping product on or about April 30th in quantity. We have capability to make about 5,000 swabs a week and 10,000 vials, and we've actually received our first Canadian orders today. So very topical for us, and these are great opportunity to help public health globally and to be able to have a great opportunity for our shareholders that leverages our company's core strengths. And we see the Red Controls branded product, fully regulated, innovative, proprietary, rolling out more broadly. And our company's opportunities, as has been discussed with others, are not limited to COVID-19, but certainly this is an opportunity to help public health and employ our skills. I'll just won't dwell on a lot of other things. We also have a great partnering asset, but you know, our company is very much a real company, and we have 80 employees, 24,000 square feet of manufacturing and administrative spaces in Mississauga, and definitely some material opportunities.
So this is our forward-looking statement disclosure. Read it at your leisure. We have an experienced executive team here at SQI, led by, at the moment, Eric Brower, our Chief Scientific Officer, who's also our interim CEO. The board is currently in an active search for a full-time CEO, and that search is nearing an end, I'm happy to say. But along with myself and Mullen and Peter Lee, our founder, that makes up our senior team. So a background in the industry and also from outside the industry that gives us a really good, diverse set of skills from various backgrounds. Our board of directors, which maintain a 77% ownership in SQI, we are fortunate to have such a financially strong board, three of whom, Mr. Beto, Connor, and Matthews, along with their deep business experience, continue to be strong advocates and financial supporters of SQI. So we're very happy and proud of that. And then Mr. Zwissler, second to the bottom on the list. He's our newest addition to our board. He was the CEO of Cardinal Health China and a member of Cardinal Health's global executive team. Eric started a small healthcare distribution company in China, which subsequently, 17 years later, was sold to Cardinal Health for $1.2 billion. So Eric's deep knowledge in the healthcare industry and operating in China is expected to be invaluable for our future. And I'm not going to belabor a lot of these points because a lot of them have been gone over already by my esteemed diagnostics colleagues, but we are also a multiplexing technology company. Multiplexing, as a definition, is just the detection of multiple analytes from a single biological sample. So one well within a consumable in one plate gives you multiple results. So if you're thinking about it in terms of pain points for a customer being a laboratory, the cure to that pain, the pain is the cost and labor. And the cure for that pain is multiplexing on automated systems. And our systems are scaled to meet different types of demand, from our SquidWorks large system down to our SquidX semi-manual, semi-automated system. And then our newest, our Squid Express, which we'll be launching here soon, is a point-of-care device. So what I call an alphabet soup of quality at SQI, we are FDA cleared, Health Canada cleared, CE marked, New York State Department of Health approved, which is just another bar of quality that assays need to go through when put into clinical laboratories. We're ISO 13485 on our way to MDSAP, which is a new thing for this year. CGMP, we have assays in CLIA environments, and we also partner with 2 now CLIA laboratories where our tests are being performed. And 5 areas of focus for SQI: life science research, custom diagnostics, lung and organ health, acute respiratory distress syndrome, or ARDS, and then obviously COVID-19. So for the purposes of this discussion today, I'm only going to be talking about lung, organ health, ARDS, and COVID-19, because they all are related, utilizing biomarkers that have similar aspects, and they're all obviously related to respiratory health and lung health. So our partnership in this field really started with Toronto General Hospital and United Health Network, or University Health Network rather, sorry. They are a global leader in transplantation, performing 700 total organ transplants in 2019. In 2019, 212 lung transplants, which is the largest lung transplant program in the world, with the lowest operative mortality rate of 1.4%. And they were named last year by Newsweek the #7 best overall hospital in the world of the top 10. So very proud to be working with them and their team. And within the lung transplantation program at Toronto General, they were the ones that performed the first successful single lung transplant in 1983, and also the first successful double lung transplant in 1986. And in 2015, they were the first institution to perform a triple organ transplant in one case and one procedure of lung, liver, and pancreas. So they really are trailblazers and innovators in the field. And so for lung transplants, there are 3,000 lung transplants in North America per year on average. The current lung utilization rate, however, is only 21%. And so when I say a utilization rate, that means that only 21% of the lungs that are presented for transplant are even transplanted into recipients. So by that aspect, essentially a lot of lungs are being thrown away. And how that manifests itself into patients is that the average wait time for a patient waiting for a lung transplant is about 6 months. And for a lot of patients could be years, just depends on their current condition. So the downstream effect of that then is obviously a lot of people die each year waiting for an available organ. And one of the reasons for that and for the low utilization rate is right now lung quality is subjective. So what that means is the surgeon quite literally will squeeze the lung. They visually inspect the lung. I've heard stories about smelling the lung. It's all very subjective based on the surgeon in that moment. And then they will decide in that moment if the lung should be repaired and if repair is even an option in their institution. And that repair is done by a process called EVLP, or ex vivo lung perfusion. And that's what you see in the picture there on the screen. That is a real human donor lung that has been excised from a donor body, put inside a device called an ex vivo lung perfusion system, and various liquids and treatment options are pushed through the lungs. And what that does is it essentially repairs the lungs throughout a multi-hour process. That kind of system, that kind of process is performed on about 1/3 of cases in North America right now, maybe a little bit less. And it's growing because the EVLP process has recently received FDA clearance. So we expect that number to grow exponentially over the next 3 to 5 years. And so what we have done with our partners at Toronto General is developed a test that is called the TortiX lung assay. And this assay measures specific inflammatory markers in the donor lung, as well as measuring the lung throughout that improvement process on EVLP. And what it does is it takes a very what has been historically a very subjective, opinion-based method of determining whether or not lungs are suitable for transplant. And it makes that assessment objective and data-driven so that the surgeon can make an informed decision based on real-life data. We're currently in discussions with the FDA, very favorable discussions, actually. So we are expecting some movement on that here soon, which would be the first of its kind in the world. And by that process, the lung availability is expected to double, and with TortiX lung, increase even more availability of lungs. The next topic is acute respiratory distress syndrome, or ARDS. And ARDS is the late stage of lung trauma, lung injury. And this really starts to kind of blend itself more into COVID, which I promise we'll get to. ARDS, symptoms of shortness of breath, labored breathing, confusion, malaise, low blood pressure. And the things that cause ARDS are everywhere from pneumonia, respiratory viruses, COVID-19, and then things like being on transfusion or ventilator-induced lung injuries, trauma, drowning, vasculitis, overdosing, a patient of transplantation, lung transplantation. So what we have done is looked at what these different outcomes are. Obviously death, ICU admission, being put on a ventilator or needing artificial lung support. And we found that the treatment expense in North America for this alone is $2.3 billion. And so the likelihood of successful intervention is sorely needed. And that led us to the development of our RALI-DX, Inflammatory Response Panel, RALI standing for Respiratory Acute Lung Injury. And these are a set of biomarkers in a panel, multiplex, that indicate the severity of lung injury. And what those results do is it helps a physician make various critical care decisions based on the results of those biomarkers. So again, it's taking something that has been very subjective in the past and putting an actual quantifiable data set to those decisions to help guide those treatments. These markers, these biomarkers, are an area or a type of protein that are called cytokines. Doesn't mean much to most of you probably, but cytokines have just notoriously in our business, and my colleagues can attest to, are just notoriously hard to work with. But we have been doing this for a very long time, and we really have become experts in the field of multiplexing proteins. And because of that expertise, we've been able to take what is on other systems anywhere from a 3 to 7 hour assay down to 1 from sample to result, which is a less than 1 actually, 51.5 minutes. I just saw the data the other day. So it's a very big achievement for us, and it's big in the terms of critical care and caring for those patients. And at an estimated cost of about $100 a patient, the hospital could save close to $75,000 for one of those patients or more, and I'll get into that model here in a moment. And then coming soon, we have RALI-FAST, and RALI-FAST takes one of those biomarkers that was in the RALI-DX panel, and it puts it into a point-of-care format, reducing the turnaround time to 20 minutes from 1 hour, and puts it at the point of care for the patient, whether that's in the emergency department, it is in the ICU, and that is where COVID really comes into play. So we'll get to that here in a moment. But for ARDS, and this is where the $75,000 comes from, if you look at so if you look at the green square where somebody is incorrectly discharged from the ED, and then they're told to go, and they go home and they end up having more symptoms and their prognosis turns worse, they have to come back to the hospital and they're admitted to the ICU. Versus when someone is already in the emergency department and they are admitted to a regular care, a standard care hospital ward, and then from that point they're moved on to the ICU, which is usually the path that most patients take. They go to the emergency room, they're admitted to the hospital, and then they're moved to ICU. That model alone can cost a hospital $100,000. Whereas on the red square on the bottom right, if somebody comes into the emergency department and they're immediately admitted into the intensive care unit, that saves the hospital $75,000 because they were able to skip that middle part of going into a traditional hospital room. And what this test does at RALI-DX, as well as the RALI-FAST, but especially for RALI-DX, the full 1 hour panel, it lets the physician know that the prognosis for that patient is not good, and that the patient is only going to go downhill from here, and they require advanced care. They may require ventilation. They may require different things that will make it necessary for them to be in the ICU, instead of putting them into the hospital or sending them home. So this brings us to COVID-19, which is why we're all here today. So COVID-19, there have been, as my colleagues have mentioned, there are essentially two kinds of diagnostic testing for a yes, no, you have it, you don't. It's nucleic acid testing in the molecular field, which is where I hail from. and antibody testing or serological testing. To date, there have been 41, this is actually as of yesterday, 41 different tests that have been granted emergency use authorization for the diagnosis of COVID-19. So SQI as a company, we decided to take a different strategy. The diagnosis piece, it's kind of, if you're a Tiger King fan, a bunch of tigers reaching for the same piece of meat. And that's great. That's what this industry needs. The more competition there is, the more technologies that are out there, the better the testing becomes. It's like any other field in medicine, and it's a great thing. But what we have noticed, and our partners at Toronto General had noticed, is there are no assays to triage or monitor treatment. And one thing that we've all learned about COVID-19 that you hear about on the news every day, talk to your neighbors, that John Doe, who is a perfectly healthy 45-year-old marathon runner, policeman, got COVID-19 and he passed away, or he went downhill and had to be put on a ventilator into the ICU. Whereas his wife, Jane, a 45-year-old woman, didn't even have any symptoms at all, completely asymptomatic. Why is that? Well, the reason being is because of something called, again, these cytokines, or specifically IL-6. IL-6 cytokine was written about in a paper that was published in The Lancet a few months ago out of Wuhan, China, when the outbreak first occurred. And what that paper showed, and there have been subsequent papers since, is that certain biomarkers, IL-6 being one of the big ones, indicate accelerated inflammatory response in those COVID-19 patients. And it's indicative of disease progression and the prognosis of that patient, essentially saying, how bad is this patient going to get before symptoms get bad? So RallyDx and RallyFast point of care triages COVID-19 patients while they're still in the emergency room. It tells the doctor, I can send this person home. I need to admit them to a hospital, isolate them, or they're about to get real bad really quickly and they need to go to the ICU. It's the industry's fastest turnaround time for assays of this kind, again, cytokine testing, with less than 1 hour for a 7-plex cytokine panel and 20 minutes for the point of care system. This obviously saves the hospital valuable resources and dollars. Again, something that we hear almost daily on the news and we read about in the paper about ventilators in short supply, ICU beds being taken up and people having to be wheeled out into the hallway. This saves that hospital those resources by allocating these resources correctly. And then obviously it will save lives. COVID treatments is something that's an interesting aspect as well. These IL-6 inhibitors that are being developed by companies like Regeneron, Roche, and Sanofi are currently going through clinical studies to see what their effectiveness is on reducing IL-6. And by reducing IL-6, that is said to reduce these inflammatory flare-ups within COVID-19 patients' bodies. So with these current studies that are currently going on, our relationships in our life science and pharma marketplace, as well as our customers' relationships with these pharma customers, or these pharma companies, our IL-6 and our RallyDx assays are perfectly poised to potentially be a companion diagnostic, and some of those conversations are underway. We are also in discussions with the FDA, and we have studies that are in progress right now to look at RallyDx and RallyFast as a positive predictor of disease progression in COVID-19 patients. We have 2 clinical studies, which total 640 patients, one in Toronto and one in the US. And this is a very important point that one of my colleagues had brought up earlier this afternoon, is a lot of companies can just kind of throw some spaghetti at the wall and request an EUA authorization, but it's the ones that have been around, it's the ones that have experience that know that you're only going to make an impact in the field of medicine and with the FDA and the market at large if you get your data, and if your data is of high quality data. And that's what we do, and that's what we're currently doing. So RallyDx and RallyFast studies look at all respiratory illnesses, not just COVID-19, because remember, they were designed for ARDS. ARDS being the end stage of respiratory illnesses. So we're, better be lucky than smart sometimes. We were just fortunate. It's really kind of not the greatest word to use, but COVID-19 coming when it did has allowed us to have a specific diagnostic use case for these panels, specific with this pandemic and COVID-19. But it's also being looked at for flu, pneumonia, and other illnesses as well. And here's our company snapshot. The obligatory shares outstanding, market cap, etc. And as well, if you have specific questions that you'd like to field towards our finance group, my colleague Mullen can be contacted at that email or that phone number.
I think that was very interesting, and it was the first chance that I've gotten to see a presentation by SQI. So thank you for that. And that concludes the company-specific presentations today. And we now have our last panel, Into the Lab, exploring testing and treatment for COVID-19 and other pathogens. The panel will be hosted by my colleague, Tina Byers, so I'll let her take over.
Thanks. So Russ is staying on, and then rejoining us are Cameron Groom, who's President and CEO of Microbics, Jack Reagan, who's founder and CEO of Lexigene, Frederick Orst, who's CEO of IMB, and David Elsley, who's President and CEO of Cardial Therapeutics. So Jack, maybe we can start with you because you spoke about the importance of multiplexing in the context of COVID. Can you expand on the need to go beyond a simple test for COVID and the necessity of products that can detect multiple pathogens?
Right. Well, you may have caught, the director of the CDC, Robert Redfield, mentioning just yesterday the need for multiplex testing, particularly looking at this upcoming fall. I mean, right now we've been a little bit fortunate in the sense that this COVID-19 pandemic has occurred as the traditional flu season has tailed off. So most people presenting into the hospital with severe illness are assumed to have, COVID-19. Now fast forward to the fall when we expect to have, influenza come back as it always does. Now layer on top of that, COVID-19, and layer on top of that just the overall panic of people. There's going to be a strong desire for multiplex testing. And as I mentioned earlier, the healthcare practitioners feel very deflated and defeated when they run a singleplex test and it only returns a yes or no on COVID-19 only, because there's always that underlying, question as to whether or not it's a false negative. And as I mentioned earlier, some of the tests out there in the market today were rushed through the FDA very, very quickly. Data is coming out right now suggesting, or not just suggesting, but demonstrating that they have poor sensitivity, missing as many as 15 in 100 positive cases, or even worse than that. And so this is a case where as we progress, the poor technologies are going to be kicked aside and the better technologies are going to rise to the top. And we certainly believe Lexigene will be part of that group of technologies rising to the top and being a favorite technology moving forward.
I think because this is such a critical issue, this won't be a matter of first to market, but best to market. So I guess as a follow-up to that, what defines best to market in this scenario?
So
maybe
really,
Russ and Cam, you can chime in.
Right. I mean, ultimately, any company should feel like they're being judged by peer-reviewed journals, by people who are publishing and aren't being paid by the manufacturer of the system. It's ultimately academics, and for that matter, government officials will take a look at these tests and do side-by-sides. And only under a controlled setting, when you're doing a fully blind study, looking at a cohort of samples across multiple platforms, can you really then come up with a data set where you're like, okay, this particular technology excelled here, this one, didn't do so well over here, but excelled in this front, et cetera. And so really, as time passes, these publications will come out, people talk at conferences, word spreads, and in the long run, the better technologies will win out. And Lexigene has long prided itself in pursuing technology that we view to be gold standard chemistry and just automating that. And so we believe in time that we'll prove our technology to be one of the better ones out there on the market.
Russ, you kind of spoke to earlier the number of tests that have come out. Have you seen anything in regards to progression diagnostics, like the one that you offer?
No. The very simple answer, no. No one has received not just EUA for COVID in terms of cytokine testing, but there has never been an FDA-approved cytokine test ever. So again, first to market versus best to market, we hope to be both.
In general, what do you think the future of testing is? Are we on the way to having at-home kits, or is that a reality in the near future, or is there too much margin for error?
Yeah, so you may have seen that the FDA recently granted EUA authorization for an at-home collection kit. It's not necessarily doing the test at home like some of the direct-to-consumer tests, such as Everlywell, Microdrop, I'm Aware, those types of systems. But this is one where a swab is sent to at home to whomever orders it. The patient does it themselves, and they send it off to a lab, in this case, LabCorp in the US. And the LabCorp does the test and sends the result back to the consumer. I think that the only way that this is done at home, where almost like a home pregnancy test, is what's called a lateral flow with antibody testing. And as I can't recall who mentioned it earlier today, but those have been notoriously inaccurate, specifically for COVID. That being because, I mean, obviously, when a patient is left to do their own collection and their own testing procedure, you introduce wildly inaccurate errors that could happen, but also because of the highly cross-reactive regular cold coronavirus versus COV-2, which is what we're seeing this year, it's hard for those quick and dirty lateral flow antibody tests to be specific for this type of COVID. This type of coronavirus, sorry.
And Cam, maybe you can talk about that too as a quality assessment product. Obviously, with the home testing kit, it brings up a lot of room for error.
Oh, well, Jack was referencing, a particular test that was showing an error rate of 14 in 100 under controlled conditions. When you're talking about, technicians, new technicians using a new test in a new location under very high stress conditions, the error rate can be very high inherently in running any test. With regards to the molecular tests, those are what test for active ongoing infection with the virus. That's what's being run right now. With regards to antibody tests, we don't know, as Russ was indicating, the extent of cross-reactivity of antibodies for other human coronaviruses. We also don't know whether those antibodies are going to be diagnostic, and we don't know whether those antibodies are going to be protective. So, we're going to see people claiming they have functional antibody tests or serology tests for COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2. We already see that. We just don't know if the tests work or even if they have meaning if they work. So for the time being, that's why we're being correctly advised to rely on the molecular tests for tracking infections and tracking the extent of the outbreak. Jack and Russ, I don't know if you want to amplify on that.
Cameron, I thought it was well stated. So.
Okay. Thanks, Tina. Thanks, Jack.
We did get a question for the audience. I think this is for Russ. So how many time points are needed to establish IL-6 in the disease progression?
Yeah, so what we found is that IL-6 is present in a patient who's diagnosed with COVID or who has COVID-19, not immediately, but at infection. But if the person is coming into the emergency department, they have already experienced some kind of symptom, whether it be mild or severe, and that IL-6 level is already elevated. And one of the things that we're also learning is what exactly is high, right? That's why there are clinical studies. Previous to COVID, a high IL-6 level was something in the realm of 10, maybe 15 in concentration terms. What we're seeing in some patients in the ICU at Toronto General, for example, there's a patient with 1,000 or 1,500. So even the scale of what is a hyper-inflammatory response is changing. And so what the importance of having these sorts of tests that are able to accurately measure what that level is, and then tie that to data in peer-reviewed journals, as Cameron was saying, is what's important, and that's what we're doing.
Yeah, it definitely seems like there's still a lot to learn through this process, and there are a lot of unknowns about COVID-19 and the potential mutations. So maybe a question for David. Armand had mentioned the Gilead study in Chicago that's showing some early signs of success. Are we getting a better sense of the mechanism of action to fight COVID, whether that's anti-inflammatory or antiviral?
I think it's we're still too early days in terms of understanding the mechanism. This virus could confound us for some time to come. I think a strategy that we are carefully reviewing right now and in discussions with our steering committees is this whole issue of elevated risk with respect to patients with a prior history of cardiac injury. We know that IL-6 is elevated in these advanced patients that end up in the ICU. But we also know that at presentation, if these patients have even the slightest elevation of cardiac injuries, such as troponin levels, we know those patients fare very poorly in terms of their outcome. So we're looking at strategies. We've just recently presented experimental data at the ACC, the virtual sessions showing a cardioprotection effect of the pharmaceutical molecule that we're developing, the cannabidiol version. We know this molecule is active in man. It's been widely studied in central nervous system disorders in children, and we're looking at opportunities to develop it as a cardioprotective molecule because we've shown its ability to basically protect the cardiovascular system against such potent immunosuppressive therapies as dexamethasone, prednisone, very powerful anti-inflammatory strategies.
Okay. We have a couple questions for Frederick. If you have a chance, can you elaborate on the potential vaccine? Will it require only a single injection?
Typically vaccines, especially new vaccines, require 2 injections. But I think, we are in the very early days of vaccine development. So, most of the clinical trials, certainly our clinical trial is designed to look at both. And like I was saying in my presentation, in terms of logistic and number of doses you can supply, definitely a 1-dose vaccine would have a big advantage over a 2-dose for many reasons. So we're going to be looking into that, but it's a new virus. We don't know a lot about it yet. So this will come from clinical results.
And obviously it's a platform technology that you're using. So would you expect the platform to be able to be used for different mutations of the virus?
Well, that's one of the big advantage of synthetic technology. Again, because you can quickly make those changes into the active ingredients that you're using in vaccine. Without the need to redevelop, the process of manufacturing and all of that, it gives you that flexibility. So that's why, synthetic vaccine technologies are so attractive for those type of situations where there is a risk of mutation, of a virus.
And just going forward in terms of looking at other pathogens, and anyone can answer this question, how does the development timeline change as you learn about this disease and you work through the process of finding treatments and diagnostics for these diseases?
Maybe I'll chime in first here. So this is one of the aspects of LexGene technology that's extremely unique. If you look at other technologies out there in the market today, they're what we call closed access systems. What closed access means is the manufacturer makes a cartridge that has all the test components embedded inside of it. As a result, there's a bottleneck in regards to manufacturing. It takes a long time to get that very complex, test cartridge out to the market. And as a result, you saw weeks, if not months, for these big multi-billion-dollar companies to get their technology configured to detect COVID-19. In contrast, Lexigene anticipates being the first microfluidic instrument that uses commonly used reagents that's going to hit the market. And so when I say commonly used, our platform places the test material in a microcentrifuge vial, which is commonly used in all laboratories. And for that matter, if you were an academic, you could buy our technology, develop your own tests, put your own tests on our system, and be up and running. And so, given the fact that there are multiple vendors that make the liquid chemistry that our platform actually executes, the PCR chemistry, it allows for multiple vendors to provide the core material required to run our technology. And so because of this, as the virus mutates or a new pathogen emerges, we certainly anticipate people running Lexigene's technology will be able to very, very rapidly configure the instrument to detect a mutated or a novel strain. In theory, that should really help us curtail the spread of a novel infection.
Okay. We've been hearing a lot about convalescent serum recently. Can we just talk about what that is exactly and where we are in the process of using antibodies of recovered patients to help find a treatment?
Maybe I'll touch on that and others can expand. The thought is that patients that have recovered may have circulating antibodies in their system that are protective against the virus, and by extracting their plasma effectively, that could be a therapeutic for patients that are at high risk from the virus. This has been done before. These are called hyperimmune plasmas. You take plasma from a group of recovered patients, treat it such that you're concentrating the antibodies of those patients and sterilize it against potential viral or bacterial contamination. It may work if the antibodies are truly protective. It could help patients, but it's expensive and it's not without risks. It would not be something that would be available to all patients, but perhaps it could help those at high risk.
And do you need quite a large sample size of patients who have gone through COVID and have the antibodies? Is there much variation between these patients?
I don't think we have those answers yet, Tina.
Okay. And we've been hearing a lot of talk about the US reopening their economies, albeit at a controlled rate. Do you think this is too soon? And what do you think the risks are and the risk of resurgence is because of this?
I guess I'll take this question as a US resident and arguably a hotspot. So I'm north of Boston, and if you look, basically New York, New Jersey, and Massachusetts are some of the hotspots. Here in Massachusetts, we have more cases than California, and California is much larger than Massachusetts. Because of the number of cases, we have not discussed reopening yet. Our schools are canceled through the end of the year. However, down in Georgia, they're looking at reopening as soon as I think tomorrow. And that's been received with a lot of criticism. And it's a really, really challenging topic matter because you have people who are out of work and need to feed their families. And so you're in a situation where you're weighing the public health versus the need to put food on the table. And so as a result, in the United States anyway, the governors have evidently the final say on how to and when to reopen their economies. But it is going to make it very challenging to get a hold of this pandemic. If we don't get to the point where we have very, very few cases, new cases, where we can do contact tracing and really facilitate the request to self-quarantine to minimize the spread, if we don't get to that point of contact tracing, and that can only be achieved if we're really flat in the curve, then we're going to open up too soon. The cases are going to spike. Even though we have the advantage of summertime coming along, we'll have a very difficult time, and it'll be even worse in the fall.
Yeah, and this is an interesting point. The Imperial College of London modeling was suggesting the UK health system would be overwhelmed by a factor of 35 times their available ICU beds if nothing was done, and that peak would hit in May, June timeframe. They modeled out that if everything was done properly, they would hit double their capacity, which is arguably manageable. But then their suggestion was there would be a second wave in late November, December that could be 12 times the capacity. So that has certainly shocked a lot of governments, and that's a lot of the preparations that we see are in anticipation of a second or a third wave when conditions favor the virus a little bit more in the winter, and that could overlay with a traditional flu season, which would be very bad, of course. So these are some of the preparations that need to be made.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think we're going to be living with the long-term consequences of this well into the future. I mean, if you look at one of the conditions that we're studying is acute myocarditis. Acute myocarditis has been caused by one of the major causes of acute myocarditis or heart failure is a virus. And this is a new cause. COVID-19 is a new cause, but we have to look at what are the long-term consequences. I mean, you can even have young people now that are recovering or even asymptomatic, but have these elevated cardiac markers. So in the future, are we going to see long-term damage of this? So there's going to be this tug of war from a social point of view of how to control the various outbreaks. But I think it's going to be important to bring new therapeutic strategies to try to insulate or protect these patients. And I think the most vulnerable patient population are not only elderly patients, but patients with this history of cardiovascular risk. So I think it's going to be vitally important that we have ways to cardioprotect those patients, and that's primarily underlies Cardiol's focus.
And for blood clots in the lungs, of course, have been implicated quite a bit too. And ironically enough, and unrelated to the diagnostic side, we have a partnering asset that's actually the safest and most effective drug that's ever been available for pulmonary embolism. And Microbix has been working for years to get a partner to bring that drug back onto the market. So it's unfortunate it's not currently available.
And I think the U.S. federal government has learned quite a bit from this experience in terms of diagnostics. I don't think that there's anyone on this panel who would disagree with the fact that the government dropped the ball. And I think that the lesson learned, and it is a balance. I don't envy the people at the FDA at all and their jobs and what they have to do in balancing quality, assays, and availability as well. But I think that they learned that being able to grant EUA to more technologies, but at the same time having rigorous data instead of just rubber stamping, there's got to be a balance, and I think they've learned that. So I think moving forward for future diseases that will inevitably come along, I think that the rollout of these diagnostic devices are going to be faster and more widely available. I hope. I think we all do.
And David, I think it's come out in the news recently that there is potential for this to have COVID to be permanently damaging and have lasting effects. So can you speak to any data that you've seen in regards to this?
Well, again, it's just these this distinguishing factor that seems to be emerging in terms of how we stratify patients based on risk is not necessarily age. We have young people that are otherwise perfectly healthy, but if they have the slightest elevation of these cardiac markers, they can fare very poorly. I mean, again, with myocarditis or inflammatory heart failure, this condition has been taking lives of people less than 30 years of age for many years, and one of the major causative factors is the virus. So I think we just don't know at this time, but if these asymptomatic patients have underlying cardiovascular damage happening, we could be in for a whole history of, or a future where heart transplantations are necessary in these patients because they can develop cardiomyopathies or heart failure.
like streptococcal infections damaging the heart, history, scarlet fever and whatnot.
And would you expect that to be chronic damage or certain adverse events that they might have to watch out for in the future?
I suspect it could be chronic, and young people will end up living to develop heart failure, and that is a very poor prognosis. I mean, heart failure remains the leading cause of death and disability in the Western world, and that is not going to change anytime soon. So this could be another contributor to that. So it is vital that we're able to rapidly diagnose, we're able to identify these patients at risk, and we're able to intervene early to prevent that potential damage from it being exacerbated.
We do have a question from the audience. The question is, we've recently read a lot about patients showing micro blood clots. Do any of these diagnostics capture this?
Lexigene is not.
No. That there might be some of the cardiac stress markers could pick that up, evidence of blood clots, but the tests that we're discussing are really about measuring active viral infections presently. The tissue damage and the inflammation is probably what's driving the clot formation, and of course can be fatal, unfortunately.
And our inflammatory markers are not currently tied to clotting, at least in our data.
But
And
there are
go ahead.
I was going to say there are tests that are proxies for tissue damage in things like cardiovascular disease, the troponin I, CKMB, myoglobin. There's a number of them available that could be useful in monitoring for emerging clots and damage from those.
I'm assuming this is a question for IMV. The question is, how early this summer do you hope to start vaccine trials?
Yeah, that's the goal. Like I said, we are currently conducting preclinical studies to validate both the safety and the best, vaccine candidate for human studies, with the hope that we can initiate the trial in the summer.
Okay, well, I think we're approaching the end of, actually, we're a little bit over time. If anyone has any last minute questions, you can feel free to send them in. It's a really interesting time, and I think we'll thank all of you for coming here and speaking about your companies. Obviously, we're working on fighting the cause, and I think as a result of this crisis, everyone on the panel has received increased investor interest. So the challenge and the opportunity lies within how you turn this moment of spotlight into a long-term strategy. I'm looking forward to following all of your stories and seeing how these companies grow and shape the future of our healthcare system, not only within Canada, but globally as well. We do have one last question for Jack. When is the release date for Lexigene machine?
So we expect to be selling before the end of September. And so we're doing everything we can to speed up our manufacturing process and getting through the FDA. And so, as I said, we're still on track for that. And I certainly hope we see no reason why I won't be selling in September, put it that way.
Let me know, Jack, if you need external controls to go with those. We'll be happy to do it.
Absolutely. We will do.
Thank you all very much. So that concludes the presentation and panel sessions for today's event. A sincere thank you to our sponsors, Market One Media, who is a trusted partner in navigating this new IR reality, and Bright Light Media, who's helped Adelaide Capital shift into this new world reality and made this event possible and many other events that we've held over the past couple weeks. So a big shout out there. And actually, Bright Light Media has been streaming this whole session on their YouTube account because the Adelaide Capital YouTube account wasn't ready to stream. So I really appreciate the help there. As I mentioned earlier, this entire session will be made available as a replay in segments as well as in its entirety, probably in about a week's time. So make sure to subscribe to Adelaide Capital's YouTube channel to know when we've uploaded it. I would like to thank very much all our presenting companies for taking the time to explain their unique technologies and products to us today. We appreciate what you're doing for us and the world. At the start of the conference, I mentioned that at Adelaide Capital, we've tried to approach these difficult times with positivity and a sense of community. I think the most positive change I've noticed in this is that while staying physically distant, we've all felt a stronger connection to each other and to humankind. And the technology that we take for granted and often complain about in our daily lives has allowed us to stay very connected and engaged. And really, at least for me, has redefined a sense of community. And that I think is really powerful. Like, we're not alone in this fight, even if you live alone like I do. We have each other, and globally, we have a vast wealth of medical and scientific professionals, all solely focused on one problem. You heard some of them here today, but there are many, many more great minds working on solving this pandemic. So that's something I carry with me. I heard Dr. Boney say something along those lines a few weeks ago in the webinar that I listened to, and it stuck with me and has given me a lot of hope. So I do believe that together we'll find a way out of this crisis. So there you have it. With that sentimental thought out of the way, we invited Jordan Hardy from the Hand Sand Project to come and speak a little bit about what he's doing in his community. I just think it would be interesting because on this session, we have people from a variety of different cities across Canada, North America, and the world. So I think his model and what he's been providing to his community might be replicable in other communities. So Jordan, if you're there.
I am, yes, thank you.
Do I need to turn your video on?
There we go. I've got a background from another conversation.
No, I love it. It's great. After my depressing speech, why not lighten things up a little bit?
For sure, that's hilarious. Okay, so yeah, I'll talk about what we've been doing over the last 5 weeks. We're in Ottawa, and we, obviously this pandemic started, and we realized that hand sanitizer would be a very in-demand product. I have a close friend that owns a sanitation company, and he was able to get me some. And I filled about 100 bottles, and I made a post on Reddit Ottawa, and I said, whoever needs this, immunocompromised people, cancer patients, COPD people, transplant recipients, doctors, nurses, frontline workers, etc. Whoever needs this, let us know, and we'll give it to you for free. And that post kind of exploded. We got featured in the Ottawa Citizen. We got a few other stories, CTV, a lot of radio, and stuff like that. And since then, we've raised about $25,000. And we have produced about 7,500 bottles. And we have a delivery network using an app that I built. I'm a software engineer. And we're capable of now delivering over about 500 bottles a day to local Ottawa residents completely free of charge, thanks to all the donations. And it's been absolutely awesome. We have a lot of interest from other cities. We have a group that just started in Toronto. We've got the site license application in with Health Canada that's still pending. So we're right now forced to actually provide the sealed and unopened bottle that we buy from the distillery, and then we put 8 60 milliliter spray bottles on the side, so the person can have a large refill bottle basically to use with these convenient spray bottles. Like, doctors and nurses find it really convenient when they can just whip something out of their pocket and spray a doorknob when they're out to the hospital and stuff like that. It's been quite a journey. I definitely didn't expect to be to be doing this. I work as the CTO of a large company called Habitat 7 that does global planet-saving work. And I'm still doing that 9 to 5. Very grateful for that. But yeah, this is what we're up to. And it's we've got a website, handsand.ca. You can check it out. We're definitely capable of reaching other cities. We've got the capacity to get about 100,000 bottles in the next month, and we can really help flatten the curve with this project. It's pretty exciting.
Left you hanging there, sorry. Well, thank you so much, Jordan, for what you're doing in your community. I think it's really honorable, and yeah, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been great. It's nice to meet you as well. We actually haven't met before. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Eden Rahim. For those of you who don't know Eden, he's Canada's most renowned biotech investor. He's been a friend of mine for not that long, just since I think I started working with microbics 2 or 3 years ago. But he's taught me a lot about the sector, and I thought it'd be a great way to kind of close out the session is to hear from an expert that knows how to invest exactly in this space. So Eden, thanks so much for joining us.
Very much for having me, Deborah, and kudos to you and the team for putting together this this excellent and timely conference, and assembling a great group of companies that are forging a path forward that is going to clear a way for us to sort of reemerge as a functioning society.
Yeah,
and it's important. And it's good to see Canadian innovation on display here today. Just as Deborah mentioned, I'm the portfolio manager for Canada's only fully registered biotech, small mid-cap biotech mutual fund. I've been doing this for a long time. I've been managing healthcare biotech investments for about 25 years, 10 years at RBC. Had a run of around 26% compound rate of return, then another 10 years or so at Jovian and Horizons. Doing a variety of things, mostly derivative-based and through their covered call ETFs. And for the last 5 years here at Adelaide Capital, where I manage this biotech fund. And I'm really honored to be asked by Deborah and her team to talk about this very topical subject. But before I actually dig into COVID investing, I'd like to just give a brief overview of the promise that the biotech sector has right now, because what you've actually seen during this crisis is that it's really come to the fore that biotechnology is the promise of the future, and that the world in this crisis has turned to biotechnology for the solutions that can give us some semblance of what the old world looked like and help us get back on our feet, help us function again. And so it's been a long time coming to get to this point. And again, we're really fortunate that unlike previous periods, the technology that biotech brings to bear has now been proven in the clinic. We have great companies with blockbuster drugs. The technology has evolved to a point where technology and biotechnology has fused together to make it really possible to address crises such as we have right now. So just briefly, we've seen enormous breakthroughs in the past decade. Cystic fibrosis, we've seen HIV subdued. So there are a lot of parallels actually with the outbreak of HIV in the 1980s and the solutions that were brought to bear to address that, which at the time it seemed insurmountable. But biotech found solutions, and now we have vaccines that can protect against HIV, which is extraordinary. We've seen hepatitis C cured. We've seen cystic fibrosis subdued. And in the future, we'll see gene editing technology that perhaps cures cystic fibrosis by correcting a single gene. So science fiction has become science fact. And the tools that we have now to address this are just incredible. One of the extraordinary things we've seen, as we've seen in technology, we all know about Moore's law when it comes to semiconductor processing power, but we've seen it in biotech to an even larger degree. So 20 years ago, the first human genome was sequenced at a cost of $3 billion and took a decade to do. The same thing can be done for under 1,000 now in a matter of days. Again, unbelievably extraordinary that which seemed inconceivable just 20 years ago is now rudimentary. This is a technology that biotech is bringing to COVID. Now, biotech has come to the fore, but it's been a tough 5 years in the sector. So it's a very young industry. It was only born publicly in 1980 when Genentech IPO'd in October of 1980. Since then, we've had 5 major cycles. Following each sort of bear market cycle, we've had bull markets that run several years. The worst bull market that we've had was in the 2000s that went up 100%, but many stocks were double that. But most of the bull markets we have in biotech ranges somewhere between 300% and 1,000%, run several years. The reason why I mention this is because for the past 5 years, we've been stuck in a range. And biotech has had 3 bear markets, one of over 40%, 2 of around 30%. So it's been a really tough 5-year period. But what we've seen is that biotech has begun to bubble up, and it's among the strongest sectors coming out of the sell-off that we've had, the crisis sell-off that we've had in March. And I think the reason is that investor money is moving towards the sector because they realize it is a sector of the future. It is a sector that will solve the problem that we face right now. And it's traditionally a very complex sector, hard to understand, hard to invest in. And that's because biology takes time. It takes time to develop a drug. It takes time to enroll patients, to test it for safety, to test it for efficacy, to analyze the data, to overcome all these hurdles. So, typically you'll have thousands of candidates in preclinical testing in animals and in vitro. And you go through that, you identify a drug that potentially you want to take into human trials. You go through phase 1. That will take a couple of years. You're testing just for dosing and safety. If that works, you start a couple of phase 2 trials, an open label phase 2, and then a controlled phase 2. And then if the drug makes it through phase 2, which is very difficult because most drugs actually fail after phase 2, the success rate is only 30%. But if it goes into phase 3, you can design a trial with a bit more clarity. You can enroll the correct number of patients, a correct type of patient, and your success rate goes up to about 60%. And then you submit the results of that for FDA approval. And that whole process is about a decade. Different biotech investors invest in different phases. Some, Canada has a booming venture capital sector, and they invest primarily in preclinical and incubating companies and so on. I don't. Other investors favor phase 1 and pre-phase 2. I don't. I favor post-phase 2 investments because at that point, you really don't have to rely on management. You rely on the data of the trials. You rely on key opinion leaders that can scrutinize the data and fight among themselves as to whether this drug that has succeeded phase 2 is going to be successful, whether it materially impacts how you treat patients or not. And so that's the phase that I focus on. But the whole process takes about 10 years. And as I mentioned, in that long process, that small gray shaded area is where I like to focus. Again, other investors are very successful investing in other phases. Other investors focus on post-commercialization. But for me, on a risk-reward basis, I like that because you generate very high returns with much lower clinical development risk. Now we focus on why you actually are listening to this, and that is handicapping and finding investments for companies that are developing therapies for the SARS-CoV-2 virus. As most of us already know, this virus it's very contagious. It's more contagious than the flu, but it's to this point less virulent. Now, the reason why the mortality rate is much higher than the flu is we really don't have anything that can treat it. To this point, we will in the future, but at this point we don't. So we don't panic as much as we would if we were to get the flu. If we were to get the flu, we know that there are steps we can take. We understand how it works and how you treat it. The problem with COVID-19 is that it's highly contagious and it's spreading fast, and we don't have the means yet to treat it. And that's where the fear and the panic comes in. The only thing that can address this is biotechnology. And all the companies that we're here today are vital in us getting to that point where we could subdue this. Now, it's been the wild, wild west as far as COVID-19. Companies throwing a hat into the ring to develop therapies for it, and there are multiple approaches. There are some companies that are trying to develop antibodies against it. There are other companies that are working on vaccines, prophylactic, preventative vaccines, which are very important, but it's a longer timeline. There are companies that are developing antivirals. So from the moment you're infected, you need something that could actually inhibit the reproduction of the virus in you. And there are others. A big segment of it are repurposed drugs. So there are a lot of companies that are out there that it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall. You're hoping something sticks. So there are a lot of companies that will cite some paper that shows that their drug at some point had some kind of antiviral effect, and they're going to the clinic. Now, going into the clinic itself, it's the FDA will approve that you can run a trial on it. That itself is not an endorsement of your drug. It's merely saying that the FDA has lowered the bar considerably, and they want to advance any treatment that may potentially prove to have some kind of efficacy against the virus. And so you have this gold rush that's going on. So a lot of companies have had big advances because it's that much of a headline chasing type environment that we're in right now. Most of these companies will not turn out to be good investments. So as we'll discuss a little bit further on, there are questions investors have to ask themselves before they actually invest in this gold rush that's going on right now. So I mentioned that we had antivirals that will target different strains. And I know it's a complex slide, and you don't have to worry about the details, but this is important because it paves the way for how we think and where the treatments are coming in. So this is a slide only of the point where you're infected. It's not the vaccine stage where you're preventative, or it's not at the advanced stage when you go through something called the cytokine storm, where your body's now battling back. So this is the phase where something like remdesivir is activated, and there are other drugs that are put on a table for you. And what it is that, so the virus comes in, targets a couple of receptors on your cell, gets into your cell. It then targets the reproductive aspect of your cell, where it uses your DNA replication assembly to reproduce itself. Now, what's different about this is that it's a single-stranded RNA. And so it means that other antiviral drugs, like potentially HIV drugs or remdesivir, which is the Ebola vaccine from Gilead, could potentially inhibit the reproduction of RNA, which is why mechanistically it's targeting that. And there are other drugs that are targeting different components of that early infection. And it's very early stage, and some of these drugs are approved. So they're in active human trials right now, and that's great. The thing is, late today, we got some bad news on Gilead's remdesivir. But it's something that we here at Adelaide Capital and Armand, we completely anticipated a month ago that the Chinese trial, remdesivir, was highly likely to fail. And that's results that came out today, and Gilead got hit. And one of the reasons why we believed that the Chinese trial would actually fail is because they were enrolling patients outside of this circle. We think that remdesivir works in this early infectious stage where it can inhibit the reproduction of the viral RNA. The Chinese trial included patients that were already infected for 12, 15, 18 days and so on. So it's outside of this circle where an antiviral like that would be active. Once you get outside of the circle, this is where you get into something called the cytokine storm, where your body begins to launch an attack against that virus. And that's a whole different dynamic. That's the point where in launching the attack, you get the side effect. Your lungs fill up with a pink gummy fluid, and you start to lose your breathing ability and so on. And that's your body's response against that virus that leads to these complications. So ideally, from the point of infection, you want to be attacking this in here. Outside of the circle is where you get the other drugs, sort of the IL-6 inhibitors and so on, that are active to try and suppress the body's response against it. So I've created this all-inclusive slide. It's a reference slide for you. I know it's very dense, but you can have it for yourself. And what I've tried to do is condense the entire therapeutic landscape of different approaches to the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And I've broken it up in basically four basic areas: the therapeutics, in which are antivirals, repurposed drugs, the anti-inflammatories like the IL-6 inhibitors, and convalescent plasma. And then there's the preventative vaccines, where it's a prophylactic, and that's the one we really are looking for as a society, because it's the one thing that we could take that will help us build an immunity before we actually are infected, much like we take the flu virus. But that, I think, is most likely a year to two away. It just, when you're triggering an immune response, and there are novel approaches to that. You've got the traditional vaccines, which is sort of what J&J is approaching. Then you've got really novel approaches like what Moderna is approaching, which is it's literally using an RNA strand to trigger the production of the spike proteins by your body. And then by doing so, your body will develop immunity against it. But it's purely experimental, because Moderna hasn't developed anything past phase 2. So it's completely experimental. So we don't know what we don't yet know about that approach. It's novel. If it works, it's going to be, very significant. But I think it's further away than most have been saying. We heard from IMV today. There are sort of different approaches like INO and IMV that are DNA vaccine oriented, and that's an interesting approach to that. That may provide an approach that is more scalable and faster to get something that's available. But again, that's also novel. On the therapeutic side, we've already talked about the antivirals like remdesivir, and we all know about hydroxychloroquine. Again, the verdict is out on it. You've got a malaria drug, but its therapeutic benefit is really within a narrow dose range. So what happens is, if you dose below that range, it's ineffective. If you dose above that range, you have side effects. So you've got a very narrow therapeutic range with which this drug can be used. It failed a trial yesterday, and so that's a negative against it short term. But on the other hand, it can't be ruled out yet, because we know a lot about this drug. It's been around for a long time, and it does target the viral RNA in that early infectious stage. So, but I suspect, given that it will be among, there are about, I guess somewhere in the order of 50 repurposed drugs that have been targeted right now. So just because a company announces that it's going to enter clinical trials with this repurposed drugs, there is no value added necessarily in that. It still has to go through and prove its effectiveness. And so an investor like me, I would rather wait for data. Again, you had the high promise with remdesivir and it failed. And we had the high promise with hydroxychloroquine and it missed a trial yesterday. And we're going to see a lot of that. We're going to see a lot of back and forth with a lot of these drugs in the future. Periods of hope, periods of despair, and back and forth until we have something definitive with data that we can say we can use it. Until such time, we're really experimenting with a lot of things, and that's fine. The FDA has really lowered the bar to allow repurposed drugs to be tested in humans. On the other side, we've got diagnostic testing, and diagnostic testing, again, there are multiple approaches. You heard Lexigene talk about RT-PCR. That is the gold standard in sort of central lab testing, and anyone that's able to bring that gold standard into something where you don't have to send a sample out to another site and wait days for the results. As a result of that, it definitely will have an edge up on the market. On the other side of that, you've had this plethora of tests. They're just flooding the market. You know, the bars seem very low as far as what you can. You know, just because you can identify an antibody doesn't mean that you're testing positive. And, you know, companies like Microbics have fortunately come out with quality assessment tests that, you know, it'll provide a positive vaccine against which tests can be validated. So we're getting a lot of tests, and even the much ballyhooed Abbott test, you know, we're starting to see results that, you know, aren't quite up to promise. And so that is a consequence of the FDA's EUA, Emergency User Act, and that allows a company to market a test without having gone through the FDA validation tests. And so they're long on promise, maybe a bit shorter on delivery. So we need, you know, it's okay. It's not that it's okay, but it's not as adverse an impact to have a false positive. At least you're taking defensive measures. But false negatives, the consequence of a false negative is much greater. And so we need to be able to, at least in these tests, insure against false negatives. And so a lot of these tests, the strip lateral flow type point of care tests, there's much to be desired. And now again, they're the fastest path to commercialization, and you can potentially make money from companies that come to market, sell the test, have a short mini boom in sales and so on, but you can be obsoleted overnight because another company will emerge with a test because the barriers to entry are very low, and they'll emerge with a test that is more efficacious, more sensitive, more accurate, and you're done, right? And so shareholders have to ask themselves when they're making investments in these companies is, are you playing the long game or are you playing the short game? Are you playing the near-term game for a company that's going to launch a product but will be obsoleted quickly? Or are you playing the long game for a company that's going to develop an antiviral or a vaccine, will require multiple fundraisers, capital raises to fund these trials, and carry some clinical risk along the way, but the payoff at the end of it will be bigger. Again, in this environment, the payoff also is questionable because you don't know if at the end of the day, when you develop a drug, the FDA is going to come back to you, and not the FDA, sorry, the government will come back to you and say, well, no, you cannot charge a big premium for this drug, even though your shareholders are risk capital to develop this drug. The government may come back and say, no, we will commandeer the production of this drug, and we will determine what price it can be sold and distributed at because, it's citizens first and so on. And that's some of the risks that companies incur investing in pandemic situations. You're already seeing that. You've seen the president sort of implore companies to change, the production line to start producing ventilators and so on, and use almost thug tactics in a way to force companies to do things and shame them. And so we're not dealing with vaccines yet, or we're not dealing with antivirals yet, but that is potentially a threat for shareholders at the end of the day. I mean, we've seen giant companies like Gilead. So Gilead repurposed its Ebola antiviral, and it twice admitted it will not make any money on this. It will provide it at a cost. And not only that, it's gone a step further. It has orphan drug protection. Well, it has filed with the FDA to rescind that so that others can actually reproduce it. We've seen J&J say, even though it's not even in the clinic yet, it won't be in the clinic until the fall, said they're going to make it available at cost or less. And so for smaller companies going down that path, if larger companies are going to make it available at cost and not going to make any money, will smaller companies be able to profit from it? because, it's not a charity. They are redirecting, company funds to these projects. And so at the end of the day, will there be a long-term economic payoff for them as a result of this? And, so we're in a period, we're in the initial phase of this where you're getting giant companies are getting huge bumps in market cap. Gilead added 15 billion to its market cap, even though it said it will not earn a dime of profit on this. J&J added 20 billion, even though it said it's not going to make any money on this. And they're not even in the clinic yet. You've seen Moderna triple in price for a highly experimental vaccine that has not, none of its vaccines have crossed past phase 2 efficacy yet. And so it's a difficult environment. And I caution investors at this point in time to not chase headlines, not chase companies simply because they're repurposing a drug. You're a long way from results. It doesn't hurt to wait for data. To me, the real opportunities is less so on the therapeutic prevention side at this point, because you've got time with those. If you want to invest, there's probably more opportunity on the diagnostic side. Companies that will come out with a high quality test, companies that can validate the efficacy of tests, companies that develop tests for highly specialized organs and so on. I think that's where the near-term value added will be. I think from an investment standpoint. Now, moving on to what gets this economy moving again. And vaccines are a ways away. Results from antivirals are a ways away. It's still experimental stage, but we need to get the economy moving. And what is going to make that possible near term is very accurate, cheap, sensitive point of care tests. And some of the things, this is a decision matrix that I created for you. I'm not going to go through it, but it's a decision matrix that I think a lot of policymakers may have to go through that determines whether we can, to what extent we can reopen the economy. And, I think one of the key things that makes it possible to get the economy working is, one, identifying those who are carrying antibodies, who may have been infected, but are carrying antibodies and have already some sort of immunity. They're probably safer to go in. The only issue with that is that as a carrier, do you now infect other people that have not yet been infected? And those are some of the decisions. So you need to have a dual function. The way I think countries like Taiwan and Singapore have done a really good job of this. They did not shut down their economy, but they had widespread testing, so that the moment that you registered as a potential positive on the test, you self-quarantined, right? You took yourself out of the system, you recovered, and then you were retested and you were okay to get back in. And so we need to have that widely accessible. And, for more serious patients, obviously you'd go to, to the more expensive tests, the central lab tests. But I think we're also going to start, in order to be able to identify those of us in the population that may not even be aware that we've been infected, but have developed antibodies. You need things, cheaper, more accessible serological antibody tests out there. And, Roche is obviously a leader in something like that. It's interesting, this week, the CEO of Roche went on a rant against serology tests because he felt that there were all these companies coming out making hollow promises as to their accuracy and so on, with a finger prick of blood and so on, whereas he feels sourcing blood in the veins is a way more accurate way of doing things. So, we're getting thought leaders that are fighting it out at this point to determine what is the best way to go about this. But those are just my thoughts on what we need to get this economy open again. And this, just to summarize, what we've talked about, I do think we live in the best of times, and it may not seem that way, we're actually really fortunate that we live in an age of biotechnology, and we're just in the middle of this evolution of biology. And we're fortunate to have these tools available to develop, tools to battle this in the fastest imaginable time. When HIV broke out in the mid 80s, we had AZT, which was a terrible drug. I mean, talk about the cure being worse than the disease. It wasn't until a Canadian company, Biochem Pharma, developed 3TC, Epivir, that really made a huge difference. And then there were other antivirals, protease inhibitors that came along the way, but that took another 10 years. But we brought it under control. And then Gilead, who bought out one of my companies, Triangle Pharmaceutical, that ended up being a huge breakthrough for them that enabled them to now develop a vaccine. But this whole process took about 20 years for something like this. It was brand new. SARS-CoV is brand new, but we also already know a lot about coronaviruses. That's an advantage. We already know about SARS. So we have a head start on this. And so, it may take a bit longer than we want it to take, but it will work out. There will be solutions. As I mentioned, there's just been a huge number of announcements, companies throwing their hat in the ring. I did this slide on Monday. It's already outdated. There are 300 announcements of companies throwing their hat into the ring. There are almost 1,300 clinical trials that are either underway or will be underway in the next quarter. That's extraordinary. So it's actually using up a lot of the FDA's resources against where it otherwise would be focused. There are a number of different ways that we can approach a therapeutic vaccine. We've sort of talked about that. Different areas within the infection life cycle that we can attack. And, different solutions will emerge at different times, but it will be active. And I think the confidence that people need is that should you succumb, and I imagine over the years to come, many of us, and perhaps most of us, will at some point succumb to this virus. But it's very different to know that should you succumb, it's not a beeline to the ICU, but that it could be something that perhaps is like bronchitis or severe flu or at worst pneumonia, but at least it's treatable and you can recover from it. And I think we need to at least have the assurance of that, I think, in the next year. If we have that, I think it will give us a little more confidence to actually become more functional in society. For diagnostics, we need to be able to have more active, rapid diagnostic tests, and we need to distinguish. Given the flood of tests that are now available out there, we need to distinguish between false positives and false negatives, especially false negatives. And so I think for small companies, many of them that we've seen here and many others that are not, the question is, what is the best use of shareholder capital? Is it worth chasing down this in which it's already very, very crowded? Do you have something that is truly unique, that is truly differentiating, or are you going on a hunch? And so that's one question, I think, for the companies. And for investors is that you really have to distinguish, you have to handicap what you think the odds are of this company developing a therapy or a test in a highly competitive environment against major competitors that are throwing much more money at things. So my approach has always been to wait on the data. Other people don't, and they do just fine that way. I would rather, there is time. There is time to wait for clinical results and decide. We've already seen, again, just this week, we've seen Gilead disappoint on a trial. That being said, I do think remdesivir works. And I think that in Gilead run trials, results which will come out, I think, before the end of May, we will see that remdesivir is active in the earlier phase of infection. And that we need that. We actually do need that right now. And then finally, just, ways to reopen society again. It's through confidence that we have something should we succumb, that it doesn't lead directly to the ICU, and we could apprehend it at a controllable way. And then towards, I think, the end of 2021, maybe early 2022, we have a vaccine that is at least active in some people. The SARS-CoV is complex. I think there's one aspect of it being an RNA, single-stranded RNA with one active site. It may not mutate as much as the flu does, which has 8 active sites. So that is a positive. When we do develop a vaccine, maybe it has greater durability. Much as we saw with SARS-CoV and H1N1 and so on. The more virulent they are, when you do develop an immunity, it lasts many, many years. You don't need a vaccine the way you do the flu vaccine, which mutates every single year. And but that was it for my presentation.
I think that's a wrap. Eden, thank you so much for taking the time to present, to teach us all a lot about biotech investing and COVID-19. Your contribution to this entire session has been incredibly meaningful, so thank you so much. And I will, like I said, I'll have a replay of the entire conference as well as Eden's session. And if anyone is looking at the space, trying to figure out A from B from C, I always recommend, if you don't know enough about a space, find a professional that does. And Eden, in my opinion, is the best biotech investor I know. And I know everyone. I'm just kidding. But I would say if you're interested in investing in the space, definitely have a look at Adelaide Capital. And he's had great returns. He's got great performance. And thank you, everyone, for participating in this event. Thanks to the sponsors, to Eden, to the presenting companies. I think it's been a really fun day.
Deborah, congratulations. This is a terrific event that you and your team put on here.
Well,
under very difficult circumstances.
Yeah, who would have thought I would have sat in my den and talked to hundreds of people all day, but it's been really fun. Thank you. Thank you all for participating, and stay healthy.